Chapter 1614. Chu Luiyue raised her hand. Her fair palm waved gently, and a stream of light instantly appeared on the light bowl. Soon, a totem exactly the same as the one on her forehead appeared on the transparent ball of light. At this point, the two totems each occupied half of the light bowl. Dumpling seemed to be attracted by something as she unconsciously stared at the light bowl. There seemed to be something tugging at the power in her body. Before Dumpling could identify it, she saw the two totems merge into the flames in the light ball. Instantly, the sound of something shattering came from the depths of her mind. Dumpling's eyes widened. The connection between her and Yu was broken. However, just as she panicked and wanted to get up, the light ball suddenly split from the middle. It was as if an invisible knife had cut it evenly from the middle. The cut surface was neat and smooth, and the reddish-gold flames inside were also split into two halves. Then, the two halves flew towards Chu Luiyue and Dumpling respectively. Chu Luiyue raised her hand and caught the half of the light bowl. With a swoosh, the flames quickly burrowed into her palm. Into her body. Dumpling. Chu Luiyue reminded her. Dumpling regained her senses and looked at the half of the light ball that flew in front of her. She hurriedly reached out with both hands to catch it. In the blink of an eye, the flames in the light ball also quickly disappeared into her chubby little hands. You, Dumpling was about to say something when she suddenly froze. Because at this moment, she clearly felt that the subtle connection between them had been re-established. She could once again feel Yu's aura and emotions. Everything happened too quickly, causing Dumpling's mind to be in a daze. Previously, she was nervous and terrified, but now that she had regained what she had lost, she was naturally happy and joyful. In just a few breaths' time, it was already ice and fire. At this moment, the totems between their brows flashed exceptionally brightly and quickly disappeared. Chu Luiyue finally let out a heavy sigh when the boiling temperature between his eyebrows had completely disappeared. The huge rock that had been hanging in his heart finally fell at this moment. Finally. Everything went smoothly. Looking at Dumpling in front of him, who was still in a daze, Chu Luiyue's heart was filled with tenderness. He smiled and waved at Dumpling. Dumpling, pass, bang. Before he could finish his sentence, Chu Luiyue's vision blurred and Dumpling threw herself into his arms. Dumpling's impact was extremely strong. Chu Luiyue was caught off guard and both of them fell backwards. Fortunately, at this moment, a gentle force supported Chu Luiyue's waist, allowing her to barely stabilize her body. Regiment, woo woo woo. Before Chu Luiyue could speak, Dumpling had already burst into tears. Chu Luiyue's shoulders were quickly soaked. She immediately felt even more distressed. She hugged Dumpling in her arms and gently patted her back. All right. Isn't everything fine now? Dumpling cried until she was out of breath. Her voice was choked as she spoke intermittently. Woo woo. I thought. You didn't want me anymore. Chu Luiyue knew that this matter had frightened her and felt very guilty. However, she had just awakened the totem at that time and really didn't have the time to explain in detail to Dumpling. I won't. Dumpling, have you forgotten what I said before? She had said that no matter what, she would not leave Dumpling alone. Since she had said so, she would naturally do so. Dumpling hugged Chu Luiyue's neck tightly and her two short legs were firmly wrapped around Chu Luiyue's body. She was firmly hanging on to Chu Luiyue's body. It was as if she was afraid that Chu Luiyue would leave again. Fortunately, with Chu Luiyue's comfort, her crying gradually quieted down, leaving only her small body still twitching. But just now, I was helping you change the contract, not canceling it. The vicissitude and distant voice sounded again. At this moment, Dumpling's emotions had calmed down a lot. When she heard this, she couldn't help but pause, turn her head, and look back. Ancestor burp, this burp, what does this burp mean, burp? As she spoke, she was still burping. At this moment, she really looked very pathetic. Her pair of clear and beautiful big eyes were red. Her small and sharp nose was also red. Her chubby little face was full of tears. The ancestor sighed helplessly. Just now, the moment the contract was broken, Tuanzi cried like this. If the contract between her and Sheng Wanyu was cancelled completely, no one knew what she would do. Fortunately, Yi Zhao and the rest didn't do anything rash. Otherwise, Yu and Sheng Wanyu signed a master-servant contract previously. When she heard this, Dumpling's face was filled with confusion. That's right, what else could it be? Wasn't there only one contract between magical beasts and humans? Why did they suddenly say that it was a master-servant contract? The ancestors seemed to have seen through her confusion and continued to explain. Actually, there are two types of contracts in this world. One is the master-servant contract, which is also the most common contract in the mainland. The other is the life-binding contract. The difference between a master-servant contract and a magical beast is that the relationship between them is equal. Once a master-servant contract is signed, the life of the magical beast is closely linked to its master. If the master dies, the magical beast will die. However, a contract with the same name does not have this restriction. However, this is not the most important feature of a life-binding contract. After a life-binding contract is signed, the human and the magical beast breathe together and share the same fate. If one of them dies, as long as the other is still alive, it will preserve the other's life. If there is a chance, it can even bring the other party back to life. The ancestor's voice reverberated throughout the hall. However, Tuanzi was already stunned. A life-binding contract? Although she had never heard of it before, from the ancestor's words, it seemed very powerful. Just now, I forcefully changed your master-servant contract to a contract with the same name. Although there is still a contract between the two of you, it will not be the same as before. From now on, your life and death will no longer depend entirely on Sheng Wanyu. In this way, Yi Zhao and the rest will not be able to use this contract to do anything to you. The ancestor paused. More importantly, in this way, the two of you will have half an extra life. This was the most important thing. Status, strength, talent, these things all had the most basic prerequisite, being alive. Dumpling covered her mouth in shock, and her eyes widened. So that's how it is. So the moment she lost contact with Yu, it was because the ancestor was helping them. Happiness came too quickly, and Dumpling was still a little dizzy for a moment. She could not help but turn her head and look at Chu Luiyue blankly. Then, Yu, why didn't we make this contract directly in the past? Before Chu Luiyue could say anything, the ancestor snorted. Naturally, it's because she doesn't know how to. However, this is normal. You have to know that in this world, there are no more than 3 people who can use a life-binding contract. One of them was this. Digression, your February suddenly flashed. I'm really going to sleep. The update during the day is still at 12 o'clock. This is an extra update, not a single update. Moi, *3, epsilon*. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 16:15. Dumpling's eyes widened. So, the ancestor was really that powerful. In that case, not only could she and Yu still be together in the future, but they also didn't have to listen to the elders nagging anymore. Moreover, even if she and Yu encountered any danger again, as long as one of them could escape, then both of them could still survive. This couldn't be better. Chu Luiyue also sighed in her heart when she heard that. The life contract was indeed extraordinary. Originally, she didn't know either. However, when the ancestor's power merged into her body and transformed into a feather, covering her Yuan meridian with a layer of extremely tough armor, she vaguely sensed something. There seemed to be a chanting sound coming from afar, driving the light ball to split into two and fuse together. Although the process was rather difficult, it was worth it. She stood up with Dumpling in her arms and bowed deeply to the crimson gold heavenly phoenix on the mural. I will never forget Senior's great kindness. Dumpling's watery eyes turned, and she hurriedly shouted. Thank you, Ancestor. I knew Ancestor was the best to Dumpling. Although her voice was still a little hoarse, it was soft and cute. The Ancestor snorted. Now you have a sweet mouth. You're not angry anymore. You're not making a fuss anymore. Dumpling's little face blushed, and a big smile bloomed on her face. Ancestor is magnanimous and magnanimous. Why would you bicker with a child like me? Besides, you dote on me the most, don't you? Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to summon the Ancestor's soul, and she wouldn't have been able to become the young master and enter this place, right? The Ancestor couldn't help but laugh. You know how to talk. I wonder who you learned it from. There was no anger in his voice, only affection. Of course, he doted on Dumpling. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to spend so much effort to help her change the contract. Shangguan Yu. I still have a few words to say to you. Chu Liuyue's expression was firm. Senior, please speak your mind. The hall fell into silence. After a long while, the Ancestor said, Dumpling is the young mistress of our clan and the future successor of the clan leader. Now that she's still young, I'll have to trouble you to take care of her in many areas. The corners of Chu Liuyue's lips curved up slightly. Senior, you're being too polite. Even if the other party did not say these things, she would never let Dumpling suffer any grievances. You're willing to go to my clan alone for Dumpling. Of course, I can trust you. The voice hesitated for a moment. If you go and look for the remaining ones, I'm afraid, it will be very dangerous. Today, I will change the contract between the two of you. This is the last thing I can do to help you. Chu Liuyue's heart skipped a beat, then he nodded solemnly. Junior understands Senior's intentions. The voice laughed and sighed softly. That thing's willingness to recognize you as its master has already proven a lot. You guys go ahead. I'm a little tired and want to rest. Towards the end, his voice was indeed tinged with a bit of exhaustion and gradually became softer. Chu Liyue pursed her lips and put Dumpling down. She bowed respectfully. Senior, take care. Dumpling also bowed and said in a crisp voice. Goodbye, Ancestor. Dumpling will miss Ancestor every day. A low and distant chuckle could be heard, and then it gradually disappeared. After a while, Chu Liyue held Dumpling's hand. Dumpling, let's go. Creak, the door of the Phoenix Shrine finally opened. Everyone who was waiting outside the main hall was invigorated when they heard the sound. They looked in the direction of the door. As the heavy and solemn door slowly opened, two figures, one tall and one short, appeared in front of everyone. They were Shangguan Yu and Dumpling, who had been in there for a few days. They're finally out. This thought flashed through countless people's minds. Yi Zhao took the lead and walked forward. His gaze fell on Dumpling first. Seeing Dumpling's red eyes and the tear stains on her fair and tender little round face, Yi Zhao's heart clenched. Dumpling, what's wrong with you? Why was she crying when worshipping the ancestors? He almost immediately frowned and looked at Chu Liyue. Sensing his strict and scrutinizing gaze, Chu Liyue didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She and Dumpling came out directly after bidding farewell to the ancestors. Dumpling had just finished crying and looked extremely pitiful. It was no wonder that Yi Zhao would suspect her when he saw her. Clan leader, I'm fine. Dumpling held Chu Liuyue's hand tightly. Knowing that the clan leader had misunderstood, she hurriedly explained. Yi Zhao, on the other hand, was still skeptical. Dumpling, this is the Phoenix Shrine, and you're the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. If you're really bullied, you must tell us, okay? I'm really fine. Dumpling mumbled. It's just that I finally got to talk to the ancestors, and I'm so happy that I cried. Before coming out, she had already discussed with Yu that they wouldn't tell anyone about the change in the contract for the time being. If Yi Zhao and the others knew about this now, they definitely wouldn't have any scruples about Chu Liyue anymore. They might even ask Dumpling to stay in the Phoenix God Mountain. After signing the life contract, humans and magical beasts no longer had to stay together all the time. Magical beasts also didn't have to worry about dying because of humans. Yi Zhao and the others had always wanted Dumpling to stay. If they knew about this, there was no doubt that their reason would be even more valid. In any case, they had already promised not to get involved until Dumpling became an adult. It might be more appropriate to say it later. Yi Zhao carefully sized up Dumpling again. After confirming that she was really not injured, he finally relaxed. Then, he said to Chu Liyue, Miss Shangwan, if we offended you just now, please forgive us. Dumpling is our clan's young master after all, so we will naturally take care of her. Chu Liyue raised her eyebrows slightly. How rare. Clan leader Yi Zhao was actually so polite to her. Could it be because she had made a trip to the Phoenix Shrine? Clan leader Yi Zhao, you're overthinking. I know that you're all doing this for Dumpling's sake. Chu Liyue's principle had always been, if you respect me, I'll respect you tenfold. After all, Yi Zhao was the honorable clan leader of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. She was already very gratified that he could speak to her so calmly. In any case, it was much better than the beginning. Seeing Chu Liyue's smile, Yi Zhao's impression of her improved a little. It seemed like she really didn't take these things to heart. Although Shangwan Yu looked young, she knew her limits. She knew when to fight and when to give in. No wonder she was so famous among the humans. Yi Zhao paused for a moment before asking, did everything go smoothly during the ancestral worship? As soon as he said this, everyone pricked up their ears. This was actually what they wanted to know the most. It was normal for Dumpling to worship her ancestors. The key was, what did Shangwan Yu do when she went in? What the hell is going on inside? Amidst the silence, Chu Liyue smiled brightly. Of course. Senior is very nice. I feel very close to you. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 16:16. The huge square suddenly became even quieter. At this moment, even the wind seemed to have stopped flowing. Everyone's expression suddenly became extraordinarily interesting. What did Shangwan Yu just say? The ancestor was very kind and was very kind to her. Did that mean that she had really met the ancestor? And from the sound of it, the ancestor seemed to be very kind to her. She was a human after all. After a short period of dead silence, the square was finally in an uproar. This, she really met the ancestor. I've attended the ancestral worship hall twice, but I haven't seen him. I'm jealous. I've attended it 5 times, but I haven't seen him either, right? Other than the clan leader and elders, everyone else has been treated the same no matter how many times they've been here. If you want to talk to the ancestor, you'll have to become an elder first. Oh, right, the young lord can do it too. The prerequisite is that you have to have the ability to do so. Obviously, no one present had the ability to do so. After all, the position of the young lord already belonged to the little person standing above. Damn it. The position of the young lord has been empty for hundreds of years. Just when it was about to be chosen, it was snatched away by a little girl who broke through halfway. She has the purest bloodline, so I won't say anything. There's no point in being envious. It's only right that she can go in to worship the ancestor. But who can tell me what's going on with Shangguanyu? She's Dumpling's contractor. Even if it's for Dumpling's sake, it shouldn't be to this extent, right? What was the ancestor thinking? Yi Zhao and the others, who had seen the world, had very interesting expressions at this time. The remnant consciousness of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan's ancestor was usually in a deep sleep. It would only wake up during the ancestral worship ceremony. And the only people who could talk to it were the newly elected young lord or the clan leader. Even the 5 elders could only follow along to meet it at most. They never had the honor of being taught by the ancestor. But now, even a human was doing better than them. Although it was unbelievable, Yi Zhao and the others didn't think that Chu Luyue was lying. There was no need to lie about such matters, because it could be easily verified or refuted. This meant that the ancestor really treated her well. I wonder if Miss Shangguan can reveal a thing or two to me. Did the ancestor have any instructions? Yi Zhao took a deep breath and asked politely. Chu Luyue smiled. It's nothing much. What the ancestor meant was that Dumpling is still young, and he asked me to take care of her. She had said this sentence so casually, but in everyone's ears, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Wasn't it obvious that he was going to let her take care of Dumpling? Since even the ancestors had said so, then what right did the others have to object? In fact, Yi Zhao had already vaguely guessed this before, but he didn't dare to believe it. Only now did he have no choice but to accept reality. Even though he didn't know what the ancestor was thinking when he made such a decision, there had to be a reason behind it. The only thing they could do was to obey. I see. Yi Zhao said dryly and fell silent. He had always been a man of few words. Now that he was in this situation, he didn't know what to say. Clan leader Yi Zhao, may I know if the ancestral worship ceremony has ended? Chu Luyue suddenly asked softly. Yi Zhao was stunned for a moment before he nodded. It's basically over. In fact, the most important thing in this ancestral worship ceremony was to evaluate the younger generation and choose one of them to be the young master. Dumpling wasn't originally in this range, but her talent and strength were too heaven-defying. Moreover, she had summoned the ancestor's soul and received the ancestor's favor. Of course, the position of the young master was hers. As for the others, they had already been tested on the first day. Iran was the most promising one, so even if he was late, Yi Zhao didn't pursue the matter. Who knew that in the end, it could only be said that everything was predestined. Yi Zhao was relieved that he had high hopes for Dumpling. He didn't expect Dumpling to perform better than he had expected. Even though he couldn't break the contract between her and Shangguanyu, but, since the ancestor had agreed, what else could they say? If that's the case, I think it's time for me to leave. Chu Luyue said honestly. Even though it wasn't the right time to leave, she and Dumpling had been here for too long. Taizu was still waiting outside. In the academy, his master and various elders were also secretly worried. And Rongxiu, she had come here to solve Dumpling's problem. Now that everything was done, it was time for them to leave. Yi Zhao frowned and looked at Dumpling. Dumpling was still holding Chu Luyue's hand and standing next to her. Anyone with eyes could see her dependence and intimacy with the person next to her. Yi Zhao's lips moved. In fact, he was very reluctant to leave, but he naturally wouldn't say those words. After thinking for a moment, he finally nodded. You can come more often when you're free. These words came out of nowhere, but Chu Luyue understood. This was an agreement. In the future, she could freely enter Phoenix Mountain. Her red lips curled up into a bright smile. Thank you for your understanding, Patriarch. This is Dumpling's home. It will always belong here. Hearing this, the last trace of awkwardness in Yi Zhao's heart was finally relieved. He looked at Chu Luiyue deeply. If you need help in the future, just let me know. Chu Luiyue smiled and nodded. Thank you. The sun set in the west. The bright and warm afterglow shone on the clouds, plating them with a layer of golden light. Above the vast and boundless sea, the frozen ice reflected a faint glow. Sheng Guanjing stood on the shore and looked into the distance. Seeing that the scene had not changed at all compared to before, he couldn't help but sigh. Another day had passed. Yu hadn't returned yet. It had already been more than a month. He didn't know what the situation inside was like. Recalling the letter from before, Sheng Guanjing frowned slightly. The fact that Yu was able to ask the elder of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan to help send the news out was actually beyond his expectations. It was also because of this that he could continue to be patient and wait until now. However, Yu clearly said that she would be back soon. However, a long time had passed, and he still didn't see her figure. Crack. In the distance, a crisp cracking sound suddenly sounded, interrupting Sheng Guanjing's thoughts. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw that the frozen layer of ice on the vast sea seemed to have suddenly cracked open. His heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly took 2 steps forward and looked intently. Soon, accompanied by a series of crackling sounds, the ice layer instantly seemed to be covered with spider webs. Under Sheng Guanjing's nervous gaze, finally, bang! All the ice layers completely shattered. At the same time, the pattern formed by the golden flames in the sky also began to gradually fade. Taizu. A familiar clear voice sounded. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 16-17. Sheng Guanjing suddenly looked up. A slender and exquisite figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Her figure was light as she walked over on the waves. The shattered floating ice reflected brilliant light and landed around her, as if she was enveloped in a layer of holy light. She was powerful and noble, almost making one unable to look straight at her. Sheng Guanjing was surprised and delighted. However, he saw a small figure following beside Chu Luiyue. It was a girl who looked to be no more than 3 or 4 years old. Her eyes were exquisite and cute. Her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string. They chased after golden bells and swayed with the wind, jingling. The wind blew over and swept up her shiny pure gold lotus leaf dress. It swayed and was very moving. Sheng Guanjing was a little confused. This is beautiful and cute, but why did you bring a child with her when she made a trip there? Just as he was filled with doubts, Chu Luiyue had already pulled Dumpling over the waves and landed a few steps in front of Sheng Guanjing. Only then did Sheng Guanjing come back to his senses and hurriedly go forward. How are you? Why did you go for so long? Are you injured? Were you bullied over there? Chu Luiyue didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the series of questions. Taizu, which one do you want me to talk about first? Only then did Sheng Guanjing realize that he had lost his composure and hurriedly coughed. Tell me slowly, tell me slowly. Chu Luiyue knew that he was like this because he was too nervous about her. Her heart warmed as she said with a smile, don't worry, I'm not injured. Aren't I standing here perfectly fine? Besides, I didn't suffer any grievances inside. They were quite polite to me. Of course, that was after she threatened them with death. However, there was no need to tell Taizu about this in detail. In short, most of the time in Phoenix Mountain, the other party's attitude towards her was still all right. Sheng Guanjing didn't quite believe it. He grabbed her wrist and looked her up and down carefully. After confirming that she was really fine, he finally believed her. But at the same time, this made him even more confused. The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan's letter was very impolite. It was clear that it was aimed at you, If she went, would they really not bully her? Chu Liyue smiled. Taizu, don't worry. All the troubles and problems had been smoothly resolved. From now on, you don't have to worry anymore. Really? Sheng Wanjing found it unbelievable, but looking at Chu Liyue's appearance, it did not seem like he was lying. What exactly happened in the past month? He was momentarily at a loss for words, not knowing where to begin. He turned his gaze and saw the little girl by the side. At this moment, the little girl was tightly holding onto one of Chu Liyue's hands. She looked up at him with her round, white, and tender little face and her big, grape-like eyes. Sheng Wanjing's heart jumped. Why does this feel so familiar? Dumpling, greet him. Chu Liyue touched Dumpling's head and said gently. Dumpling obediently took a step forward. A big smile bloomed on her face as she called out crisply. Hello, Grandpa Taizu. Sheng Wanjing was instantly shocked and looked at Chu Liyue with his mouth agape. This is, Dumpling. Isn't this the name of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix that you contracted? You guessed right. Dumpling has transformed into a human. Chu Liyue explained with a smile. Moreover, she is now the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Sheng Wanjing sucked in a cold breath. What exactly did this girl do when she went to the Phoenix God Mountain? Digression, continue at 6:00 mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 16-18. After that, Chu Liyue briefly told Taizu about what had happened in Phoenix God Mountain during this period of time. She didn't mention some of the details, including the change in the contract with Dumpling. Chu Liyue had tried her best to keep a low profile, but what she said still shocked Sheng Wanjing on the spot, and he couldn't recover for a long time. Dumpling was the purest bloodline of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. You helped Dumpling open her fourth meridian. Dumpling was appointed as the young master at the ancestral worship ceremony. Even the arrogant clan leader, Yizhao, promised that Dumpling would live with you, in the future and maintain the contract until she became an adult. Then, she would make the choice herself. Each and every one of them was news that could shock the entire world if they were to be brought out. Now, all of this had happened to one person. Their ancestral worship ceremony has ended, so I brought Dumpling back. As Chu Liyue spoke, she saw Taizu's stunned expression. She couldn't help but stretch out her hand and wave it in front of Taizu. Taizu. Sheng Wanjing's eyes focused. He looked at her and then at Dumpling. No, nothing. I just felt a little surprised. Then, he closed his eyes and pinched the space between his eyebrows. Chu Liyue looked at Taizu with understanding. It was no wonder Taizu had such a reaction. For the past month, he had probably been imagining how she was bullied and suppressed in his mind every day. In the end, she only realized that her previous thoughts were completely wrong after she came out. It was normal for him to have a huge psychological impact. After a while, Taizu finally recovered. He opened his eyes and looked at Dumpling with a complicated gaze. So, you brought the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan with you just like that? Dumpling pulled Chu Liyue's hand and looked at her uneasily. Could it be that Taizu found it too troublesome to bring her along? That's right, a lot of things had happened in the Phoenix God Mountain. If it wasn't for her, you wouldn't have had to go through all that. Chu Liyue couldn't help but chuckle and poke her little head. How could the Taizu be unhappy? They were clearly in disbelief. Forming a contract with a crimson gold heavenly phoenix was already extremely rare, not to mention that she was a young master with a special identity. That's right. Dumpling had been with me for so many years. Although she had become the young mistress of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, she was still a child. Patriarch Yi Zhao and the others also felt that it would be better for Dumpling to follow me. Shangguan Jing's expression was strange. They are willing to. Chu Luiyue blinked. She didn't know about other people, but clan leader Yi Zhao couldn't bear to part with her. But so what? Clan leader Yi Zhao dotes on Dumpling very much, and it's precisely because of this that he's willing to respect Dumpling's choice. Of course, he also said that he hopes that if I have time, I can bring Dumpling back to visit more often. Shangguan Jing could understand every word, but when they were put together, he was a little confused. Did Yi Zhao really say this himself? He had always been extremely proud and disdained the human race. When Shangguan Jing was waiting here, he had suspected more than once that Yi Zhao might even directly attack you, In the end, why was the development of the matter completely different from what he had imagined? But now, the person was standing in front of him, so he had no choice but to believe it. That's pretty good. Shangguan Jing coughed and looked over Chu Luiyue's shoulder at the sea behind her. The broken pieces of floating ice were rapidly melting. As the waves surged, scattered flames could be vaguely seen burning quietly. It was as if everything was starting to return to normal. For an instant, he even felt that the past month or so was like a dream. Chu Luiyue followed his gaze, half-turned, and looked into the distance. There was no trace of the divine Phoenix Mountain here. That oppressive might had also gradually dissipated. However, compared to when they had first arrived, their mental states had undergone an enormous change. Chu Luiyue smiled. Taizu, suddenly, her voice paused, as if she had sensed something, and she looked back. It was evening now, and the sun was gradually sinking below the sea level. A familiar fluctuation came from the sky that was dyed with a layer of warm gold. What's wrong? Sensing her expression, the great ancestor felt a little strange and turned back to take a look. Above the void, there were suddenly waves gradually rising. Then, a tall and slender figure stepped out of it. It was a young man dressed in snow-white clothes, with golden cloud patterns embroidered on his sleeves and hem. Under the last ray of afterglow, he flickered with a faint glow. His appearance was enchanting, and the aura around him was indescribably noble. Just by standing there, he seemed to have the disdain and nobility to look down on all living things. It was Rongxiu. A question flashed through Shangguan Jing's mind: why is he here? The divine Phoenix Mountain was extremely hidden, and even they found it under the guidance of Dumpling. Why did Rongxiu appear directly? As he thought about it, Rongxiu's figure moved, and he headed over. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of them. His eyes fell on Chu Luiyue first. The two of them met eyes. This moment was more than 1,000 words. Then, he bowed to Shangguan Jing first. Greetings, Senior Shangguan. Shangguan Jing helped him up, and then asked. Rongxiu, why are you here all of a sudden? Rongxiu's thin scarlet lips curved slightly, and the surrounding scenery instantly faded. I'm here to take you and you back to the Yuntian Tower. Shangguan Jing paused. No, I mean. Have you been here before? No. Rongxiu was very quick-witted. How could he not guess Shangguan Jing's doubts? He explained, I can come here because of the interspatial ring on you's finger. Shangguan Jing suddenly understood. Yes. That was the most precious treasure of the Yuntian Tower. As the Holy Sun, Rongxiu could naturally sense the aura on it and find this place. Thinking about it, there were indeed several times before when you was in danger. Rong Xiu could always appear in time. It was just that this place had changed to the Divine Phoenix Mountain. How's the situation of Patriarch Bailey Jun? Chu Luiyue stepped forward and asked. Rong Xiu's smile deepened. Don't worry, it's basically solved. It's just that it will take some time for Patriarch to wake up. Chu Luiyue finally felt relieved, but then she was a little surprised. We're not going back to the academy. Master and the others should still be waiting. As if he knew what she was thinking, Rong Xiu nodded gently. I've already sent a message to the academy, telling them that I will personally come to take you back to the Yuntian Tower. Chu Luiyue was stunned. There was nothing wrong with going back to the Yuntian Tower, but why are you in such a hurry all of a sudden? Rong Xiu paused, and there seemed to be flowing light in his deep phoenix eyes. Because I've been waiting for too long. Digression, I have to deal with some matters. I'll be off at 6:30 p.m. You can get a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 16-19. His words were clear and light, but they were like the wind blowing over a pool of spring water. Chu Luiyue looked into his deep eyes and suddenly realized something. Her heart beat fast. It's been too long since we got engaged. Rong Xiu looked at her attentively and gently. Chu Luiyue's heart seemed to be hit hard by something. She couldn't describe the sweetness in her heart. Thinking about it carefully, she had indeed kept him waiting for too long. In the middle of these years, she didn't even have the chance to ask what he had been through after she left and before they reunited. Rong Xiu looked into her eyes and said in a low voice, I don't want to wait anymore. Bang! Before Rong Xiu finished his words, a strange sound suddenly came. Chu Luiyue frowned and looked at the interspatial ring in her hand. The sound of a collision just now came from it. Chu Luiyue thought of something. A black wooden tablet suddenly appeared in front of them. It was the seabuckthorn wooden tablet of the Black Demon Cave that Chu Luiyue had taken from Fangzhou City. Rong Xiu's eyes suddenly turned cold. The totem on the black wooden tablet suddenly seemed to come alive. Every line was twisting strangely, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts just by looking at it. Then, the lines scattered and condensed into a line of dark red words that looked like bloodstains. If you want to save Chu Ning, I'll see you in the God-slaying tomb in 10 days. Chu Luiyue's pupils shrank. The line of words quickly dissipated and condensed into the totem again. The pressure on it also disappeared quickly. With a clang, it fell to the ground. Shengguan Jing stood aside and didn't see the words on it clearly. Chu Luiyue pursed her lips and gave off a shocking coldness. Shengguan Jing was a little worried. How are you? What did she see just now? Why did she have such a big reaction? I'll go with you. At this moment, Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. He raised his finger slightly, and the black wooden tablet flew into his hand. He looked down and then handed it to Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue looked up at him. Rong Xiu, she knew what he was talking about when he didn't finish his sentence. Although they didn't even have a chance to talk properly after she regained her memory. But she knew what Rong Xiu was thinking. She also wanted to go back with him and fulfill the promise from a few years ago. But at this moment, it's not the first time they've done something like this. Rong Xiu chuckled. Whether it was for her or for him, those people had never given up. But this time, they chose the right time. Rong Xiu's tone was nonchalant, and only the cold and harsh look in his eyes showed his current mood. Actually, this is good. Lord Chu Ning is in danger. You can't be at ease. Rong Xiu held her hand. We haven't had the time to inform Tianling. I think it's a little rushed. Chu Luiyue glanced at him and then lowered her eyes. Rong Xiao had always done things properly. He had even informed the academy. How could he forget his father and the others? Now, he said this just to make her feel less uncomfortable. She held her breath and put the wooden tablet back into the universe ring. Then, she looked up again. Rong Xiao's rough fingers gently rubbed the back of her hand. I'll go with you. His voice was as low and gentle as ever. Chu Liuyue's red lips moved slightly. In the end, she nodded. Okay. Sheng Wanjing, who was standing at the side, was a little stunned. Looking at the two of them, it seemed that they didn't plan to return to Yuntian Tower. And the atmosphere seemed to be very wrong. Dumpling stood by Chu Liuyue's legs. She clearly sensed the change in her mood and waited quietly. Taizu. Chu Liyue calmed down and turned to look at Taizu. What's wrong? Taizu looked at her worriedly. Chu Liyue said, that person has taken my father hostage. We plan to go to the god-slaying tomb. Sheng Wanjing reacted for a moment and then understood what she meant. You mean, Chu Liyue nodded. The person who could make such a sinister move was naturally the master of the black wooden tablet. Many thoughts flashed through Sheng Wanjing's mind. Then, he nodded with a serious look. I've been to the god-slaying tomb before. I'll take you there. That place was extremely dangerous. Besides, the other party had come prepared. He didn't want Chu Liyue to go there. But Chu Ning was very important to her. Even if she knew it was dangerous, she would definitely go. Instead of dissuading her, it was better to go with her. Now Yu Er's strength had improved a lot. And with him and Rong Xiao there, she should be much safer. Chu Liyue was a little surprised. You've been to that place. Why didn't you mention it before? Even when she heard that Jun Zhiqing had exiled Chu Ning in the god-slaying tomb, Taizu didn't mention it. Sheng Wanjing's expression was a little strange. It's a long story. Let's go first. Hearing Taizu's words, Chu Liyue also nodded. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble you again on the way. Then, Chu Liyue and the others left the Phoenix Mountain and went to the god-slaying tomb. Divine Dragon Island. Hearing the news from his subordinate, Mao Yang, who had always been expressionless, showed a rare look of shock on his face. Shengguan, you took a girl out of the Phoenix Mountain? But did you see if she was injured? It seems that she wasn't. Mao Yang frowned. His subordinate paused and then continued. And not long after she came out, Rong Xiao also went there. They left together. But judging from the direction, it seemed that they didn't go to the Yuntian Tower or Lingxiao College. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from love. Chapter 1620. Since they came out of Phoenix God Mountain, where else could they have gone? Mao Yang was confused. Although Sheng Wanyu was Sheng Wanjing's descendant, Sheng Wanjing had fought alone in the Divine Ruins world back then and did not establish his own force. The place that Sheng Wanjing was most familiar with was probably the northern region of the primordial world. However, it was obviously impossible for them to go there now. Rong Xiao and Sheng Wanjing were extremely vigilant. Our people didn't dare to get too close, and then we lost them. The subordinate wiped the sweat on his forehead and said carefully. It's all because of our incompetence. Please punish us, clan leader. Mao Yang shook his head. If we lost them, just let them retreat first. When it's a little later, we'll go out and ask around to see where they went. In addition, the most important thing was to find out what had happened to Sheng Wanyu in the Phoenix God Mountain for more than a month. According to his understanding of Yi Zhao, it was unlikely that he would let a human who had contracted with the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan leave safely. Moreover, they had held the ancestral worship ceremony in the middle. At such a critical moment, Sheng Wanyu could still escape unscathed. He couldn't help but suspect that there was something fishy going on. Also, find out who that little girl is. Mao Yang frowned. When Sheng Wanyu entered, he was clearly alone. Even Sheng Wanjing was rejected at the door. Why did a 3 or 4-year-old girl suddenly appear beside him when he came out? That little girl was obviously not human. It was very likely that she was a Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix. However, the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan was the same as them. There were no children in the clan. Those who could transform into human form were at least in their teens. This little girl's appearance was really strange. Yes. The subordinate hurriedly responded respectfully and was about to leave with a bow. Just as he took 2 steps, he was stopped by Mao Yang again. Remember, when you do these things, you must be low-key and cautious. The 1000 Summit is imminent, no accidents are allowed. The subordinate's expression became even more nervous. Yes. Lingxiao College. In the main hall of the Grand Orient Bell Tower, Dean Nan Su Huai and several elders were gathered together. The 10,000 Wine Mountain has basically been cleaned up, but it will take a long time for it to be completely repaired. The few mountains that had been affected could now be opened again. Elder Hua Feng sat below and leaned lazily against the back of the chair. He let out a long sigh of relief. Only the heavens knew that during this period of time, they had been so busy dealing with the aftermath that they didn't even have time to catch their breaths. Fortunately, he had finally completed the bulk of the task, and the rest could be taken care of slowly. Nan Su Huai said, "Thank you for your hard work." Elder Hua Feng waved his hand. "This is what we should do in the first place. What's so hard about it?" "But it's just that the mountain is a little bald." As soon as he said that, the tense atmosphere in the hall immediately eased up. Nan Su Huai couldn't help but smile and shake his head. Lingxiao College had existed in the Divine Ruins world for tens of thousands of years. The undulating mountain range was basically filled with ancient trees. Although the 10,000 Wine Mountain was a little special, the trees on it were the kind that required several people to wrap their arms around. After the shocking battle last time, the 10,000 Wine Mountain was completely destroyed, and everything on it was naturally destroyed. By the way, Dean, has there been any news from the Yuntian Tower? Didn't Rongxiu send back a message that he would personally bring you, and the others back to the Yuntian Tower? Elder Bo Yen leaned forward and asked curiously. When the remaining elders heard this, they also looked at Nan Su Huai. It was obvious that they were still a little nervous. That girl had gone to the Divine Phoenix Mountain, so they couldn't help but be worried. It had been more than a month, and they didn't know how the situation was. Nan Su Huai nodded. It should be soon. Just wait a little longer. Suddenly, his voice paused, and he raised his eyes to look at the side window. Everyone followed his line of sight and looked over. Nan Su Huai narrowed his eyes and raised his hand. Buzz! A transparent barrier began to fluctuate, creating ripples in the air. Then, something flew in from outside the window, passed through the barrier, and landed in Nan Su Huai's hand. Nan Su Huai opened his hand. It was a bronze sparrow. Rongxiu sent a letter. When the elders saw this, they were all overjoyed. Nan Su Huai squeezed his fingers. The bronze sparrow opened its beak and spat out a golden mist. The mist quickly condensed into 2 lines of words in the air. When Nan Su Huai saw it clearly, his smile froze. As soon as he finished reading, the words disappeared. The elders sitting below didn't see the words clearly, but they saw the strange look on Nan Su Huai's face at this time. Dean. Elder Bo Yen called out tentatively. What's wrong? Why does it seem like something's wrong? Nan Su Huai came back to his senses and frowned. He looked at the elders and said in a low voice. You has safely come out of Phoenix God Mountain. Everyone was happy and relieved at first, but when they saw that Nan Su Huai's expression was still tense, they found it even more strange. "Dean, you has safely come out. Why do you still look so worried?" As Elder Bo Yen asked, his expression suddenly changed. "Could it be that you, was bullied by them?" She and Dumpling came out with her. Nan Su Huai shook his head. "The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan's matter has been resolved smoothly. It's just that Rong Xiao wanted to bring them back to Yuntian Tower, but Youth received news about her father, Chu Ning. Now, they are on their way to the Godslayer tomb." The Godslayer tomb. The expressions of the several elders were all shocked. That place was extremely dangerous, and they were going there just like that. No wonder the dean looked so serious. Just the few of them. Nan Su Huai nodded. That was what he was worried about. The Godslayer tomb was vast, and there were dangers everywhere. What's more, it was the enemy who invited them. It was obvious that the enemy had set up an inescapable trap and was just waiting for them to make their move. But Chu Ning was Yu He's father, and they had to go. Nan Su Huai thought for a moment and stood up. "Bo Yen, I'll leave the school's matters to you for the time being. I'll go to the Godslayer tomb personally." The elders were shocked, and they all said that they wanted to go with him. But they were all rejected by Nan Su Huai. "I can't leave the school alone. You all should stay. I've been to the Godslayer tomb before, and it's more convenient to go alone." After saying that, without waiting for anyone to refute, his figure instantly disappeared on the spot. At the same time, on one of the peaks of Lingxiao College, Yi Wenzhua suddenly opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the Donghuang Clock Tower. He left at this time. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1621. Lingxiao College had just gone through a calamity, so there was no reason for Nan Su Huai to leave at this time. Something must have happened. However, he didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. Yi Wenzhua narrowed his eyes and pondered for a moment before he got up and headed to the side hall. "Jiu Qing." Yi Wenzhua pushed the door open and entered. Upon hearing the voice, Jun Jiuqing, who was reading something, immediately put down the things in his hands and stood up. "Master." Yi Wenzhua's eyes quickly swept across the table, and he immediately frowned. "Reading the letter from Baiming Dynasty again?" Jun Jiuqing nodded. "Father said, now that you're in the Divine Ruins world, you should focus more on this side." Yi Wenzhua interrupted him. "There's no need to pay too much attention to Baiming Dynasty. Don't forget which family's blood flows in your veins." When he said the last half of his sentence, Yi Wenzhua's eyes were staring straight at Jun Jiuqing, carrying an indescribable pressure. Jun Jiuqing paused for a moment and the corner of his lips seemed to twitch. "You're right, Master. Jiuqing will follow your teaching seriously in the future." Yi Wenzhua nodded in satisfaction. It wasn't easy for him to raise Jun Jiuqing, so he didn't want him to waste his time and energy on unimportant things. Yi Wenzhua pressed one hand on the table and tapped it with his fingers. "Nan Su Huai left the school just now." A look of surprise appeared in Jun Jiuqing's eyes. "At this time? I don't know what he's doing. However, I can probably guess a little." Yi Wenzhua sneered. The fact that he left Lingxiao College at this time means that the matter is more important to him. It's very likely that it has something to do with Shanghai Yu. A dark light flashed in Jun Jiuqing's eyes and disappeared in an instant. She should still be at Phoenix God Mountain. If the dean goes now, it means that she must have left Phoenix God Mountain. Yi Wenzhua suddenly stopped what he was doing as countless guesses flashed through his mind. Did something happen to the Shanghuan Yu? Yi Wenzhua muttered. Jun Jiuqing lowered his eyes and asked after a moment. Now that the dean has left, what does Master plan to do next? Ewen's heart was filled with anxiety. This time, Nansu Huai finally came back, but before they could confront him, he ran away again. After pondering for a moment, his expression finally settled. I'll go after him. You just wait at the academy. Jun Juqing raised his eyebrows slightly, adding a touch of wickedness to his already coquettish appearance. This. Are you sure? No one knew where the dean was going or what he was going to do. If you follow me so rashly. It was precisely because of this that they had to follow him and control his whereabouts. Ewen's raised his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say any more. You just have to stay here and take care of the matters in the academy. As for the rest, Master will take care of it. Jun Juqing lowered his head. Yes, I will follow Master's orders. Ewen's figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. The room became quiet and empty again. Jun Juqing raised his head, the expression on his face was much calmer. He lowered his eyes and glanced at the letter on the table, then sat down again. After he was done, he slowly put the letter away. Then, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. After a while, his eyelashes fluttered slightly, and he opened his eyes again. But at this time, his eyes were filled with a biting cold murderous intent. Annihilated again. What are you doing? Digression, the famished February tossed out a small piece of supper and turned over to sleep. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1622. Send another one. Jun Juqing shouted in a deep voice. The room fell silent again. After a moment, Jun Juqing's gaze swept across the letter on the table. He immediately took it in his hand and got up to walk out. Before he reached the door, the void in front of him rippled. In the next second, he raised his hand and waved. A black spatial crack appeared. His expression was cold as he stepped into it. The wind lifted the corner of his clothes, and he disappeared in an instant. Phoenix God Mountain was very far away from the God-slaying mound. There was no teleportation formation between the two places. Fortunately, Chu Luiyue and the rest were not weak. If they traveled at full speed, they would not be too slow. In addition, Shengguan Jing had been to the God-slaying mound before, so they avoided many detours along the way. After traveling for a day and a night, they came to an undulating mountain range. Finally, they decided to rest for a while. Night fell, and the full moon hung high in the sky. The mountain peaks formed winding and surging lines in the dark night. They found a flatter place to rest at the foot of a mountain. The bonfire danced, elongating their shadows. Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged with her hands on her knees. She was concentrating on absorbing the force of heaven and earth. Although she was already a high god, after traveling at full speed for a day and a night, she had used up a lot of her energy. She needed to rest. Dumpling was lying beside her. She had fallen into a deep sleep. Chu Luiyue wanted to let Dumpling return to her body. It would be more convenient that way. However, Dumpling had just transformed into a human. She was curious about everything in the outside world. Chu Luiyue let her be. Hence, her small body could not support her weight. She fell asleep as soon as she landed. In comparison, Rong Xiao and Shengguan Jing were in a much better situation. The two of them agreed that Shengguan Jing would guard the first half of the night, and Rong Xiao would guard the second half. However, Rong Xiao did not go to rest. Instead, he took out a fist-sized round stone and polished it. The stone was black. Under the light of the bonfire, it did not have any luster. It seemed to have swallowed all the light around it. However, it vaguely gave off a sharp and cold aura. As Rong Xiao polished it more and more, the black layer on the stone faded away. A golden light was faintly discernible. Shangguan did not care about it. He knew that Rong Xiu was also a weapon refiner. And he was talented and powerful. It was normal for him to polish a stone. However, when the stone emitted a trace of golden light, it finally attracted Shangguan attention. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the stone for a while before he asked with uncertainty, "What's the matter?" "This is black gold spirit stone." Rong Xiu didn't stop and lightly nodded. "Senior Shangguan has good eyes." Shangguan exclaimed to himself. He was a weapon refiner venerable. Naturally, he knew how precious the black gold spirit stone was. It was extremely hard and could naturally nurture force. Divine weapons forged with the black gold spirit stone were of high levels. The level of a divine weapon was not only determined by the weapon refiner standard. It was also closely related to the quality of the materials used. Some things could only be forged into high-grade divine weapons at best. This was because the Tianlei power of a king divine weapon was not something it could withstand. Meanwhile, some of them had great potential, and could even be used as emperor artifacts or martial highness artifacts. The reason why the black gold spirit stone was so precious was that it could withstand the Tianlei power of a venerable divine weapon. In other words, the success rate of using it to forge a venerable divine weapon was higher. Therefore, it was very famous among weapon refiners. However, the production of the black gold spirit stone was very low. It was also very difficult to find. Therefore, it was considered a treasure among treasures. Even a famous weapon refiner venerable like Shangguan had only heard of it in rumors. He had never seen it before. The Yuntian Tower was indeed rich. They could even take out such a thing. Shangguan decided to watch the Rong Xiu forge. The more he watched, the more surprised he was. This was because he realized that the Rong Xiu's talent and strength in weapon refinement had actually exceeded his previous expectations. Judging from the way the Rong Xiu polished the black gold spirit stone, he was skilled and nimble. He could even be considered to be a master. Even compared to Shangguan he wasn't much weaker. Shangguan touched his chin. He raised his eyelids slightly and glanced at the Rong Xiu. The young man's handsome and devilish face was as clear as jade under the illumination of the fire. He was incomparably noble. Speaking of which, he only knew that the Rong Xiu was the number one in Lingxiao College's weapon refinement ranking. However, he had never seen the Rong Xiu forge with his own eyes. Now that he saw it, it was indeed quite amazing. Polishing the black gold spirit stone seemed simple, but the requirements were extremely strict. To be able to reach the level of the Rong Xiu, experience alone was definitely not enough. More importantly, one had to rely on talent. Shangguan had always been very proud in this aspect. However, when he saw the Rong Xiu's actions, he vaguely felt that the Rong Xiu's talent seemed to be slightly better than his. At the very least, when he was at the same age as the Rong Xiu, he definitely could not do this. Shangguan rarely admired anyone in terms of weapon refinement. Otherwise, he would not have been able to establish the record of defeating several weapon refinement venerables without being defeated. However, when he looked at the Rong Xiu at this moment, he praised from the bottom of his heart. He was indeed a rare weapon refinement genius. However, the strange thing was that in the world of God's ruins, most of the rumors about the Rong Xiu said that he was decisive and ruthless. In Lingxiao College, the fact that he occupied the top of the Azure Cloud Roll of Honor made everyone know that he was extremely talented and had extremely strong combat strength. However, it did not seem to be too exaggerated. Logically speaking, with the talent that the Rong Xiu actually possessed, his reputation as a weapon refinement master was definitely much greater than now. However, it seemed that no one had specially mentioned it before. Shangguan frowned. Could it be that the Rong Xiu was deliberately hiding it? Clang. A crisp sound of collision suddenly sounded, interrupting Shang Wanjing's thoughts. He looked over and saw that the Rongxiu had already finished polishing the black gold spirit stone. The originally pitch-black round stone now shone with a golden light. The layer of black on the surface had been completely polished, revealing a layer of gold. It was clear and lustrous, but it looked extremely tough. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see a black pattern on the surface. Those lines flowed and changed into some kind of pattern from time to time, with an indescribable strange beauty. The Rongxiu took out a sharp silver carving knife and began to carve on it. Shang Wanjing could not help but ask. Rongxiu, what kind of yuan instrument are you going to forge? The Rongxiu paused, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. The pure gold armor that you wore previously shattered, so I thought of forging a better one for her. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1623. Shang Wanjing was dumbfounded. Armor. Armor. How many black gold spirit stones will be consumed? Rongxiu paused and said, this is not a problem. It's just that it might take some time. It would be best if it could be completed before entering the god-slaying tomb. Shang Wanjing was so shocked that he couldn't speak. This not a question. Such a small piece was a rare treasure that was hard to come by in the world. He originally thought that Rongxiu was going to forge it into a short sword or something else, but he never expected that he was actually going to forge a set of armor for you. Some time ago, when Chu Luiyue went through the disaster in the Wine Mountain, the pure gold sacred armor on her body was indeed completely destroyed. Shang Wanjing had also thought about this problem, but unfortunately, he never had the chance. When he was waiting outside the Phoenix God Mountain, he was full of worry and couldn't calm down to forge weapons. He didn't expect that Rongxiu would be one step ahead of him. And it was with this extremely precious black gold spirit stone. Shang Wanjing suddenly felt that the little stock in his hands was really not worth it. Compared with the black gold spirit stone in Rongxiu's hands, it was really inferior. Shang Wanjing calmed himself down. Anyway, it was for you, It was a good thing. A good thing. Thank you for your trouble. Shang Wanjing coughed. But isn't it a little too late? Their schedule was originally very rushed, and Rongxiu had even less time to forge weapons. And if he wanted to use this black gold spirit stone to forge a perfect set of armor, it would have to be a king divine weapon. At that time, it would be unavoidable for him to go through a lot of trouble. To complete it before entering the god-slaying tomb was indeed too difficult. Rongxiu's lips curled up slightly, and he smiled faintly. I'll try my best. Shang Wanjing opened his mouth and glanced at the black gold spirit stone that was shining with golden light. In the end, he nodded. He wanted to offer his help, but then he remembered that Rongxiu had already finished polishing it. It would be inappropriate for him to intervene now. He could only hope that Rongxiu's refining would go smoothly. Rongxiu lowered his head and continued what he was doing. His expression was very focused. His bony hand was holding a carving knife, and he was carving the stone stroke by stroke. Without making a sound, the black gold spirit stone had already changed its appearance. As Shang Wanjing watched from the side, a thought suddenly popped into his mind. Why does Rongxiu look so familiar? It was as if he had seen it somewhere before. However, this thought only lingered in Shang Wanjing's mind for a moment before he quickly suppressed it. Perhaps he was thinking too much. The night passed quickly. When the first ray of sunlight shone down, Rongxiu stopped what he was doing. He raised his gaze slightly, glanced at Chu Luiyue, and put away the item in his hand. At this moment, Chu Luiyue finally opened her eyes and slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. After a night of rest, her physical and mental strength had basically recovered. The fatigue on her body was swept away, and even her eyes were brighter. She stretched lazily, and a few crackling sounds came from her body. Dumpling, who was beside her, heard the noise and also turned over. She rubbed her eyes and subconsciously leaned toward Chu Luiyue. "Ah, you," she mumbled, as if she was still half asleep. She opened her arms and was about to hug Chu Luiyue's neck. However, just as she was about to pounce into Chu Luiyue's arms, she suddenly felt a chill at the back of her head. Dumpling's body stiffened. She subconsciously turned her neck and looked to the side. The Honorable Saint was smiling warmly like a spring breeze. Dumpling suddenly woke up. She abruptly stopped in her tracks and quickly retracted her small arm. Chu Luiyue was waiting to hug her when she suddenly saw Dumpling stop and retract her arms. "Dumpling." Chu Luiyue was a little puzzled. There was something wrong with this child. "Ah, you, Dumpling is so tired. Dumpling, can you go back today?" Dumpling shouted a string of words like a cannon. Chu Luiyue was stunned. "Of course. You." Before she finished speaking, Dumpling's figure had already flashed and disappeared on the spot. The next moment, she returned to Chu Luiyue's body. "Phew," Dumpling let out a long breath. "That was close." Chu Luiyue was speechless. Why is she in such a hurry? Is she tired out from yesterday? Are you feeling better? Rongxiu walked up and asked gently. Chu Luiyue looked up and nodded with a smile. She didn't know if it was because Taizu and Rongxiu were both here, but she had a good night's rest. "That's good." Rongxiu raised his eyebrows slightly. Let's continue." Shengguan Jing buried the bonfire and raised his voice. Chu Luiyue nodded. The group continued on their way, heading toward the god-slaying mound. Red Moon Desert. The scorching sun hung in the sky, and heat waves were rolling. At first glance, it seemed that even the air was distorted. Only the lake in the middle of the desert had a hint of coolness. A gentle breeze blew, causing circles of ripples. A figure suddenly appeared beside the lake. Purple hair, purple eyes, and a long robe. It was Dugu Maobao. He stood by the lake and glanced at the sky. After sensing that there were no changes, he retracted his gaze. Looking at the calm lake, he narrowed his eyes and waved his sleeves. The water in the lake automatically parted to two sides. Dugu Maobao's figure flashed and quickly disappeared under the lake. Not long after, the surface of the lake returned to its usual tranquil state, as if nothing had happened. Dugu Maobao walked to the dungeon under the lake. In the dim and cramped space, there was still a faint smell of blood. A few black chains wrapped around two figures. They were Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao. When the two saw Dugu Maobao's figure suddenly appear, they were delighted. Diwu Zhangze smiled. "Big Bao, you're back." But soon, his smile froze on his face. "You're injured." Dugu Maobao's expression was indifferent. "Just a small injury." Lan Xiao stared at him for a while and suddenly sneered. "Tsk. Big Bao, do you really think that you can hide some things from us just because you've reconstructed your divine body?" Dugu Maobao was about to speak when blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. His body suddenly fell backward. Bang! He fell heavily to the ground. "Big Bao!" Diwu Zhangze exclaimed. Lan Zhao's expression also changed. The chains clanked as they were dragged by the two of them. Fortunately, Dugu Maobao didn't faint and stood up. I'm fine, you call this fine." Diwu Zhangze's tone, which was always gentle, also became stern. Dugu Maobao wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His face was much paler than before. He closed his eyes and said word by word, "That person is about to wake up." The surroundings suddenly became silent. Digression, 6:00 in the afternoon. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1624. As expected. Lan Zhao's lips curled up, and a mocking smile appeared on his beautiful face. If not, Lingxiao College wouldn't have caused such a huge commotion. When they found out that something had happened, they already had this guess. In the end, it was really, you fought with him? Diwu Zhangze asked anxiously. Dugu Maobao paused. Not really. After the sky shuttle array was destroyed, you repaired it. After that, I came back immediately. This injury was left behind because he didn't defend himself against the counterattack of the other party's power. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening. Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were both shocked. Sky shuttle array. You asked that girl to repair it. As Lan Xiao spoke, he suddenly thought of something, and his eyes widened slightly. This is the reason why you asked to memorize those Xian arrays day and night. Dugu Maobao glanced at him expressionlessly, his eyes saying, you just found out. Lan Xiao was instantly dealt a huge blow. How old was that girl back then, and you already thought of this? Dugu Maobao, you're already so old, and you're still doing this. How much did you suffer to memorize those things back then? Pfft. You're really shameless. Although she was very talented back then, her level wasn't high enough, and the Xian arrays Dugu Maobao showed her were mostly too profound. In order to memorize those Xian arrays, she put in a lot of effort back then. If not for that, she wouldn't have been able to deal with Lingxiao College's disaster. Dugu Maobao looked indifferent. The college will be hers sooner or later. Protecting Lingxiao is also her responsibility. Although it was still a little early, this matter had long been part of Dugu Maobao's plan. Looking at his self-righteous look, Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were speechless for a moment. After all, what he said wasn't without reason. Although the process was difficult, the original intention and result were good. From the looks of it, Dugu Maobao was not wrong. It could only be said that it was too strict. Pervert. Only that girl can stand you. Lan Xiao pouted. However, after hearing Dugu Maobao's words, their worries were greatly alleviated. Only one of his hands is hidden under the mountain of myriad wines. It should still be some time before it fully awakens. Dugu Maobao pondered for a moment before looking at the two of them. During this period of time, you two should reconstruct your god bodies as soon as possible. Easy for you to say. Lan Xiao leaned lazily against the metal chain at the side and reached out his hand to lightly knock on the cold and heavy chain. We've been here for so long, and you're the only one who succeeded. Not only that, but they also paid a hefty price. Dugu Maobao's face darkened. Lan Xiao pretended not to see anything and shook his head lazily. Didn't you see that I failed last time? It took me a long time to fix this face. I won't be able to do it again in the near future. As he spoke, he looked up and glanced at Diwu Zhangze with a smile that wasn't a smile. Diwu, why don't you try? Diwu Zhangze took half a step back in disdain. Speak properly. Lan Xiao was really sick in the head. Give him some sunshine, and he would be brilliant. He had just confirmed that Dugu Maobao didn't expose his identity in the world of God, and now he was making waves again. Pfft! Lan Xiao closed his eyes and waved his hand. Anyway, you guys can do as you see fit. If he failed again, it didn't matter if he lost his life, but the key was that he might drag these two down with him. It wasn't worth it. Diwu Zhangze shook his head helplessly and looked at Dugu Maobao. It's naturally great that you didn't expose your identity this time, but there's no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. There will still be clues left behind. You have to be careful when you go to the world of God next time. Dugu Mabao knitted his brows slightly and then nodded. They had endured in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years. If they failed at the last step, it would be a huge loss. The previous 2 times were special circumstances, especially with Lingxiao College, and he had no choice but to take action. This was also the reason why he came back immediately after the matter was over. Oh right, how's you now? Diwu Zhangze actually wanted to ask just now. The level of the Sky Shuttle array was extremely high. Although she had Dugu Mabao's help, it was still a huge challenge for her. Dugu Mabao's expression softened. She summoned the divine realm and regained her memories. What? Really? Dugu Mabao's words immediately made Lan Xiao, who was originally planning to rest, energize again. Did you remember what happened before? Dugu Mabao's eyes flashed, and he nodded. Actually, he didn't expect that she would. It was a pity that after the matter was over, she directly fainted. And he had to rush back to the Red Moon Desert as soon as possible, so he didn't have time to say more. She's injured, but Nan Suhuai and Rong Xiu are here, so it shouldn't be a big problem. That's good, that's good. Diwu Zhangze was overjoyed, and Lan Zhao's eyebrows were tinged with a hint of a smile. So, she has broken through to the exalted god level again. Dugu Mabao nodded. This was also what he was happy about. Back then, that girl had spent a lot of effort to cross that threshold. Once she was reborn, the past was gone, and everything started from scratch. Not everyone had such courage and perseverance. Fortunately, she was finally standing in this position again. Dugu Mabao's lips moved, and he said, but, back then, she took the initiative to leave the divine realm to Meng Xian to help her keep it. Losing her memories seems to have been planned by her beforehand. Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were both stunned when they heard this. There was too much information in this sentence, so they couldn't react for a moment. You're saying that back then, she did it on purpose? Diwu Zhangze asked dryly. Dugu Mabao narrowed his eyes. Basically, I'm sure. And Rong Xiu should know about this too. So, when we asked him back then, he refused to say it directly. Why? Dugu Mabao didn't say anything. Perhaps she was the only one who knew the real reason. Forget it, that girl has always had her own opinions. She must have her own reasons for doing this. Lan Xiao, on the other hand, was very open-minded. He smiled and raised his eyebrows. The next time we see her, we'll ask her personally. Won't everything be clear then? Diwu Zhangze suddenly frowned, and his expression became serious. His reaction immediately attracted the attention of the other two. What's wrong? Dugu Mabao asked. Diwu Zhangze rarely showed such an expression. Seriousness, suspicion, confusion, worry. Diwu Zhangze raised his eyes, looked at the two, and said word by word, the people from Black Demon Cave seem to have entered the God-slaying tomb. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1625. What are they doing there? Lan Xiao frowned. Haven't they stopped for the past few years? Why are they causing trouble again? The God-slaying mound was a dangerous place. Most people wouldn't go there for no reason. Even those who wanted to train or hunt for treasures wouldn't choose the God-slaying mound. There was nothing there except for corpses that had been deposited for thousands of years. Besides, the God-slaying mound covered a vast area. Once one went in, it would be difficult to come out. Just how bored were the people of the Black Demon Cave to go there? Dugu Mabao's eyebrows twitched. Can you find out how many of them went? Diwu Zhangze closed his eyes. A strange totem was faintly discernible between his eyebrows. After a while, he opened his eyes and shook his head. This aura is concealed very well. I can only temporarily determine that the people of the Black Demon Cave have gone to the God-slaying mound, but I can't guess anything else. If I were in the Divine Ruins world, I might be able to see more clearly. Unfortunately, he had been trapped here for tens of thousands of years and couldn't reconstruct his divine body. Naturally, he couldn't go. Those people have never had good intentions. As Lan Xiao said that, he suddenly laughed. However, after so many years, you can still detect their aura immediately. That's not bad. Diwu Zhangzi snorted. No matter what, they had to kneel and salute me when they saw me back then. Although I've already cut off contact with them, it's always better to know your enemy. Dugu Mabao pondered for a moment and said, "This is strange. Let's not make any moves for now and see what they're planning to do." Diwu Zhangzi nodded in agreement. You and Lan Xiao can recuperate during this time. Leave the rest to me for now. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chu Luiyue and the others were getting closer and closer to the God-slaying mound. In the evening, they arrived in front of a forest that stretched endlessly. The strange thing was that the trees in the forest were all black with red leaves that weren't dense. The leaf was about the size of a palm. It was extremely thin and had a serrated edge. At first glance, they looked like red flying daggers. Sheng Wanjing looked ahead with a solemn gaze and said in a deep voice, "This is the Scarlet Soul Forest. Once we pass through here, we will reach the God-slaying mound." Hearing his serious tone, Chu Luiyue felt a chill in his heart. This place should be dealt with carefully. She tilted her head and looked ahead. Under the gradually darkening sky, the trees in the Scarlet Soul Forest were like bony hands covered in blood, gently swaying in the wind. A faint smell of blood permeated the air. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but frown. It's poisonous. This Scarlet Soul Forest will emit poisonous gas from dusk to dawn. Therefore, the best time to travel was at noon. Let's find a place to rest first and move out tomorrow. Sheng Wanjing explained. Chu Luiyue nodded and looked at Rongxiu. Then, they followed Sheng Wanjing and stepped back. Outside the Scarlet Soul Forest, rocks were piled up. They found a relatively flat place surrounded by a few huge rocks and sat down. After Chu Luiyue sat down cross-legged, she quickly closed her eyes and continued to cultivate. After a few days of training, she wouldn't be as tired as the first day after running for a day. Therefore, other than recovering her strength, she used most of her time and energy to study Xian formations and prescriptions. Needless to say, she had already tried to repair the Sky Shuttle array with Debao's power. Now, she had basically mastered the Xian formations that she had learned from him. In the past, those Xian formations were quite difficult for her. Even if she memorized them, she might not understand them completely. If he wanted to use it, it would be even more difficult. But after going through the Sky Shuttle array, it was much easier for her to look at them now. In addition, she was also reading and studying the doctor's book of medicine that Elder Wanjing had left for her. In addition to the prescriptions that she recalled, there were many things that she needed to understand. After Chu Luiyue was completely immersed in her cultivation, Rongxiu took out a brand new ink gold spirit stone and started to polish it. In fact, this was already the 8th ink gold spirit stone that Rongxiu had taken out. He polished one every day, starting at night and ending at dawn. He could always polish the ink gold spirit stone perfectly within this period of time. Sheng Wanjing was still secretly amazed at the beginning, but he gradually got used to it. In these few days, he understood two things. Firstly, Rongxiu's family background is really rich. Second, Rongxiu's talent and ability in refining weapons was indeed far beyond his imagination. After struggling for a while, Sheng Wanjing also got over it. Indeed, only such a man was worthy of his After looking for a while, Sheng Wanjing suddenly thought of something and asked, Rongxiu, we are going to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest tomorrow. Is your armor too late? Rong Xiao stopped what he was doing and looked up. Shangguan Jing hurriedly said, "Don't get me wrong. I'm not rushing you. I know that your efficiency is already very high. It's just that these days, you haven't slept or rested. I'm worried that you've exhausted too much energy. The Scarlet Soul Forest and the God-Slaying Tomb are both extremely dangerous places. You have to be 120% alert to deal with them. Why don't you take a rest today?" He had been to this place before and knew how difficult it was to deal with. He was really worried that it would be more dangerous for Rong Xiao to go in his current state. Rong Xiao's lips curved up, and he smiled. "Thank you for your kindness, Senior Shangguan. Besides, this armor is about to be completed. I'd better finish it directly." "It's about to be completed." Shangguan Jing looked surprised. Rong Xiao nodded. "When this piece is polished, it's basically completed." Shangguan Jing was stunned for a while. Rong Xiao said before that he wanted to create an armor that was more powerful than the pure gold sacred armor. Then it had to be a king artifact, right? But why did Rong Xiao say it so easily? "A little later, I may have to trouble you to help take care of you, Rong Xiao raised his chin. "I'll go over there and finish the last part." Triggering Tianlei would definitely cause a big commotion. He didn't want to disturb her. Shangguan Jing nodded hesitantly. Rong Xiao's expression was way too calm, so he couldn't even say anything that worried him. This man always seemed to be calm. No matter what kind of situation he faced, he could easily deal with it. After about 4 hours, the moon was in the middle of the sky. Rong Xiao picked up the polished black gold spirit stone in his hand and stood up. He was about to walk forward when a young woman's voice suddenly came from not far away. "This is the Scarlet Soul Forest. It doesn't look very good." Digression: these few days, the update time has been more casual, so today's update will end here. I won't let everyone wait any longer. Tomorrow at 12:05 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1626. The woman's voice was very young, with an undisguised arrogance and coquettishness. It was as if she really did not put the Scarlet Soul Forest in her eyes. Rong Xiao's gaze turned, and he lightly glanced in the direction of the voice. About 100 feet away from them, a group of people seemed to have just arrived. The one who spoke was a woman in a light yellow dress. She looked to be in her early 20s and had a petite figure. Her long hair hung down to her calves and fluttered gently in the wind. She looked rather fairy-like. Of course, one had to ignore her voice and the look of disgust in her eyes as she looked at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Beside her stood a well-built man. He looked to be in his late 20s, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He was handsome. He was much taller than the woman. When the two of them stood together, the contrast was great. Behind them stood 2 old men. They were dressed in black and white robes. Their hair was white and they looked rather old. However, the aura on their bodies was obscure and powerful, making them not to be underestimated. "There are so many places in the Divine Ruins world to train, why did Father choose this place? This forest looks so disgusting." The woman stretched out her slender white hand and covered her mouth and nose. Her slender eyebrows were slightly knitted. In order to come to this damned place, they had spent a lot of effort. Originally, she did not have much hope, but when she arrived, she realized that it was even more annoying than she had imagined. The white-robed old man standing behind her smiled and said, "Second miss, we are a little late. This Scarlet Soul Forest is filled with poisonous gas. If you come here during the day, the scenery of this Scarlet Soul Forest is actually not bad. Moreover, the patriarch asked you to come with good intentions, didn't he? But I don't want to come. The woman interrupted the white-robed old man's words and crossed her arms. Isn't it because that thing is here? But it doesn't have to be me and Big Brother coming personally. There are so many people at home who are idle, can't they just send a few people? Originally, her life at home was quite comfortable. Who knew that her father would suddenly send her here, not even giving her a chance to refute? The white-robed old man smiled embarrassedly. The black-robed old man's face was cold and solemn. Seeing this, he spoke, "Second miss, that thing is extremely important to you. The patriarch said that he still hopes that you can find it and bring it back yourself. That way, you can also convince everyone." His tone was much harsher and colder than the white-robed old man from before. When the woman heard him speak, she unconsciously lowered her arm. However, she still felt uncomfortable in her heart, so she raised her voice slightly and said angrily, "I'm the second young miss of the family. Even if I don't come personally, who dares to do anything to me?" The black-robed old man frowned. At this moment, the tall young man finally spoke. Don't spout such nonsense." His voice was exceptionally deep and resounding, sounding like the beating of a drum. The tone of his voice carried the majesty and dominance of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. The woman called Eve finally restrained her temper and stomped her feet. Got it. She dared to throw a tantrum in front of everyone, but she was afraid of her elder brother. This was also the reason why his father had sent him along this time. With him around, she had no choice but to suppress her temper. The young man gently patted her head, a doting smile on his face. "Be obedient. If you perform well, I will reward you when we return." Before he could finish his sentence, his expression suddenly froze and his voice came to an abrupt halt. Seeing his strange reaction, the woman couldn't help but ask, "Elder brother, what's wrong?" As she asked, she followed her elder brother's gaze and looked back. She was immediately stunned by what she saw. Not far away, a man dressed in white stood with his hands behind his back. The moonlight was like water and seemed to be exceptionally gentle when it fell on his back. Even though it was already late at night and most of the surroundings were shrouded in black shadows, it was still difficult to conceal this man's peerless charm. In fact, there was no need to see the man's facial features clearly. Just by looking at his aura from afar, one could tell that he was already more magnificent than a million other people. Nanny widened her eyes slightly. For a moment, she felt as if her heart had been struck hard by something. The man only glanced over indifferently, then retracted his gaze and turned to leave. Nanny subconsciously opened her mouth, but she couldn't say anything for a moment. "Sir, please wait." She didn't move, but Nan Yuxing, who was standing by the side, had already spoken. Rong Xiao stopped and turned back to look at them. "What's the matter?" His voice was as cold as jade striking against each other, naturally carrying some coldness and indifference. Obviously, he wasn't interested in continuing the conversation with them and didn't want to have anything to do with them. Nan Yuxing slowly clenched his fists behind him. "May I know what you heard just now?" Rong Xiao's expression was even more indifferent. "I heard everything." The two of them weren't far from each other and he was powerful, so how could he not hear? Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. He didn't expect the other party's attitude to be so tough. But on second thought, everyone had some ability. It would be more appropriate for them to be frank with each other. He cupped his fists. "What my sister said just now was just a casual remark. Please, I'm not interested in knowing this." Rong Xiao didn't wait for him to finish and interrupted him indifferently. He wasn't interested in the background and identity of these people. As for what they were looking for in the god-slaying tomb, he didn't want to know at all. "I still have something to do. Goodbye." He still had to rush to refine the armor for you, and didn't want to waste a single second on irrelevant people. Nan Yuxing didn't expect the other party to not give him any face and felt very embarrassed. He was born noble and no one had ever given him such a face in front of him. Ha, how arrogant! He sneered. Eldest young master, do you want to? The white-robed elder asked tentatively. Although they didn't say the most important thing just now, that man still heard a lot. It was strange that this person appeared outside the Red Soul Forest in the middle of the night. They should really ask properly. Nan Yi reluctantly retracted her gaze when she couldn't see that figure anymore. She happened to hear the white-robed elder's words and her expression changed. Elder Bai Tong, what do you mean by this? He was just passing by and I didn't say anything important just now. Why are you making a fuss over nothing? Elder Bai Tong was stunned by the sudden reprimand. Why was Second Miss so angry all of a sudden? This. Of course it's because our mission is important and can't be easily known to outsiders. What if? It's clearly because we didn't notice that someone was here. Why are you blaming others in the end? Nan Yi frowned. In short, we can't find trouble with them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1627. Elder Bai Tong didn't know what to say, so he shut his mouth in embarrassment. Nan Yuxing frowned and looked at Nan Yi with a scrutinizing gaze. Why are you speaking up for that person? This sister of his had been pampered since she was young. Normally, even the people in the family who wanted to hear a good word from her might not have the qualifications to do so. And that young man was just a stranger. It was really inconceivable that she would say such words. Nan Yi's face heated up from his stare. She looked away and said guiltily, I'm not speaking up for him. I'm not speaking up for him, I'm just telling the truth. Big brother, have you forgotten that before we left, Father repeatedly told us not to casually stir up trouble outside? Nan Yuxing looked at her speechlessly. It was hard for her to remember this. Unfortunately, she seemed to have forgotten that Father had specially said these words to her. He didn't provoke us first. Why do we have to find trouble with him? Nan Yi pursed her lips. When that man looked over, his gaze was extremely indifferent and he didn't even look at her. I'm tired. I want to rest. Nan Yuxing could only shake his head helplessly at Nan Yi's words. All right. Let's not pursue the matter, right? You're right. We're already in the Red Soul Forest and will be able to enter the God-slaying tomb tomorrow morning. It's indeed better to avoid trouble. He looked around and pointed at a certain spot. Let's go there and rest first. Then, the few of them walked over. As they walked, Nan Yi looked back a few times. Unfortunately, the night was dark and she couldn't see that elegant figure dressed in white. She retracted her gaze in disappointment and sat down behind a large rock with Nan Yuxing. Nan Yuxing glanced at her from the corner of his eye and his eyes darkened. How could Nan Yi's thoughts escape his eyes? She wasn't being kind. It was most likely that she had taken a fancy to that man just now. Nan Yuxing frowned. Actually, Nan Yi was already of marriageable age, but she was very playful and didn't take a fancy to any of the men that her family wanted to introduce her to. There was once when her father wanted to arrange a marriage for her, but in the end, she still ruined it. Later on, her father simply let her go and stopped caring about these things. He was just waiting for her to settle down. She didn't expect that she would actually take a fancy to a man whose identity she didn't even know, outside the Scarlet Soul Forest. Of course not. Nan Yuxing sat cross-legged, tapping his fingers on his knees. If she was just a little bit moved, then so be it. If he really did something because of this, he would have to think about it again. Elders, did you see that person's strength just now? Nan Yuxing asked after pondering for a moment. The two elders looked at each other and shook their heads. His aura is hidden very deeply. He must have used some kind of divine artifact to conceal it. Nan Yuxing paused. The two elders' eyesight was extremely good. Even they could not see through it. This proved that the other party did have some skills. Besides, both parties were so close to each other just now, but they didn't even notice the existence of that man. If he hadn't happened to look up and see, in short, that man was not to be underestimated. You have to be careful when you're outside, Nan Yuxing said. Besides, we're going to enter the god-slaying tomb tomorrow. We can't make any mistakes. The two elders' expressions turned solemn. Yes. Besides, since he's here, it's very likely that he's here for the god-slaying tomb. Tomorrow, we must act separately from him. Yes. Nan Yi pouted in dissatisfaction. Big brother, why? Nan Yuxing glanced at her. What do you think? We're not here to play. He should help her find that thing as soon as possible and go home. Nan Yi was instantly discouraged. No matter how arrogant, domineering, and presumptuous she was, she knew how important this matter was. She couldn't be careless. Every time her big brother spoke in such a tone, she knew that she couldn't continue to make trouble. Got it. She lowered her eyes and pursed her lips. It didn't matter if she didn't see him. Anyway, she had already remembered that person's appearance. Although she couldn't see his appearance clearly, such a prideful person must be very famous. As long as she asked around, she wouldn't have to worry about not knowing his identity. Thinking of this, she suppressed the restlessness in her heart. Seeing that she was finally willing to listen, Nan Yuxing nodded in satisfaction. All right, it's already very late today. Everyone, hurry up and rest. Boom. A loud roar suddenly sounded in the sky. The few of them immediately raised their heads to look. Dark clouds quickly gathered in the night sky, and the bright moon was quickly covered up. Then, a bright, silver, snake-like Tianlei appeared behind the clouds. This instant of light was like a knife that ruthlessly tore through the dark night. Elder Bai Tong suddenly said. Look! That person seems to be preparing to refine a yuan item. The few of them looked over, and only then did they see that the white-clothed man they had just met had actually walked to a relatively spacious and flat area in the distance and stood there. Above his head was the place where Tianlei had appeared. There were piles of rocks here, and the night was dark, so they didn't see him just now. Nan Yi was delighted at first, but then she looked at the elder in black and asked in confusion. Elder Wu Peng, is he really going to refine a weapon? Elder Wu Peng was a weapon refiner, so he naturally had more say in this. As expected, although Elder Wu Peng's expression was still cold, he still nodded. I didn't expect him to be a weapon refiner. Elder Wu Peng, can you tell what level he is? Nan Yi asked curiously. Elder Wu Peng looked up at the sky and pondered for a moment. I can't be completely sure yet. However, this person's speed of triggering Tianlei is extremely fast. I think he should be quite capable. Nan Yi's eyes lit up. Rumble. Soon, the heavenly lightning in the sky rapidly gathered. After a while, countless Tianlei appeared in the sky, almost forming a sea of lightning. This is at least a high-grade divine artifact, right? Nan Yi asked curiously. Although she wasn't a weapon refiner, she had seen many weapon refinement scenes since she was young, so she was quite experienced. Elder Wu Peng nodded. It's just refining a high-grade divine artifact. What's there to see? Nan Yuxing was very unhappy to see Nan Yi's reaction and immediately pulled a long face. Nan Yi snorted. There's nothing much to see, but he's a weapon refiner after all. Just this point alone makes you much stronger than me. He didn't look old either. A high-level weapon refiner in his 20s was considered pretty good in their family. At this moment, Elder Wu Ping suddenly took a step forward with a bewildered expression. Nan Yi asked curiously. Elder Wu Ping, what's wrong? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1628. As she looked, she turned back to look. She saw that the man in white had taken out a few stones that glowed with a faint golden light. Those stones were of the same size and shape, and they were arranged in a row. Upon closer inspection, she could even see that there seemed to be black veins inside. Nan Yuxing was also shocked when he saw it clearly. Ink gold spirit stones. Elder Wu Ping nodded. The rest of them looked at each other. This thing was extremely precious. How could this man take out so many of them at once? Moreover, they were used to refine weapons. So many ink gold spirit stones. What kind of divine weapon is he refining? Nan Yuxing frowned slightly. He had only been suspicious before, but now, he was basically certain that this man's identity was extraordinary. Elder Wu Ping did not say anything. His eyes were fixed on that spot. Perhaps influenced by the atmosphere, the rest of them fell silent at the same time. After placing the 8 ink gold spirit stones, Rong Xiu looked up at the sky. Tianlei was gathering and swimming wildly. The next moment, he gently closed his eyes. There was a brief silence. Following that, countless bolts of lightning came crashing down from the sky. Boom boom boom. Tianlei came crashing down. They hit the ink gold spirit stones hard. Sparks flew everywhere. His figure was almost completely swallowed by the dazzling light. He's not refining a high-grade divine weapon. Seeing this, Elder Wu Ping finally spoke in a deep voice. His tone was firm. He's refining a king divine weapon. The rest of them did not say anything. Actually, even if he did not say anything, they could tell. How could refining a high-grade divine weapon cause such a commotion? It was rare for them to see such a young king divine weapon refiner. He's quite capable, Nan Yuxing narrowed his eyes. But why does he want to refine weapons here? Refining a king divine weapon required a lot of time and energy. Even a king divine weapon refiner could not guarantee that he would succeed every time. Under normal circumstances, they would choose a quiet and safe place in advance and find someone to stand guard for them to ensure that they would not be disturbed before they officially began refining. One had to know that once the refining process was disturbed by external factors, the failure of refining was a small matter. If it caused a backlash to the refiner, it would be terrifying. But this man actually directly refined weapons outside of the Scarlet Soul Forest just like that. Was it because he was too ambitious, or did he have full confidence in himself? Arrogance. Nan Yuxing made a judgment in his heart. He had lived for so many years, and with his special status, he had seen many proud people. Even he himself was one of them. But, the man in front of him was still more frivolous and arrogant than most people he had met. Even if the other party didn't say much to them from beginning to end. But he could still feel the arrogance in the other party's bones. This made him very unhappy. A weapon refining king at this age should be quite famous in the Divine Ruins world. Why don't I have any impression of him? Nan Yuxing searched his mind for a while, but he still couldn't find the right person. Elder Wu Ping, can you guess this person's identity? Elder Wu Ping shook his head. Either the other party disguised his appearance, or, he's a newly advanced weapon refining king. He paused for a moment, and hesitated a little. Actually, in his opinion, both of these situations were unlikely. What kind of person could disguise himself as such a talented and magnificent person? If an ordinary person wanted to disguise themselves, they would basically go in the direction of keeping a low profile. Who would do the opposite? Anyone who saw this appearance would never forget it. Then what was he after? As for the second guess, to a certain extent, it was even more ridiculous. He was a weapon refiner himself, so he could naturally see the other party's proficiency and ease. This was definitely not the strength and state that a newly advanced weapon refining king should have. There's another possibility: he concealed his true strength in the past. Only in this way can we explain many things that don't make sense. That's why he deliberately refined weapons here. Nanyi came to a realization. There's basically no one here, so he specially chose this place. It's just that he definitely didn't expect to meet us. This was really a coincidence. The Scarlet Soul Forest actually circled around the God-slaying mound, but they just had to meet in this place. If this wasn't a coincidence, then what was? Hearing this, Nanyu Xing was slightly relieved. It seemed like this white-clothed man had indeed come here to find a convenient place to refine weapons. He didn't want to expose his identity, and they didn't want to interact with him. This way, both sides would mind their own business, which was not a bad thing. More importantly, it usually took a very long time to refine a king artifact. The shortest was a month, and the longest was half a year. He had even heard of someone who spent a full 3 years just to refine a king divine weapon. This showed how troublesome this matter was. If this was the case, when they passed through the Scarlet Soul Forest and entered the God-slaying mound tomorrow, this man would probably still stay here. Then, they wouldn't have to bother to separate from him. At this moment, another loud noise came from the sky. Several Tianlei appeared one after another. Nanyu Xing's expression changed slightly. Wasn't this person a little too fast to trigger the Tianlei? Enveloped by the light, Rong Xiu's eyes were still closed, and his expression didn't change. He raised his arm slightly, and his slender and fair fingers clenched into the air. The 8 black gold spirit stones started to fuse rapidly under the bombardment of the Tianlei. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1629. The incomparably hard ink gold spirit stone seemed to have become exceptionally soft in his hands, allowing him to mold it into any shape he wanted. When these ink gold spirit stones fused with each other, the faintly discernible black patterns inside also began to gradually connect with each other. A majestic aura was faintly emitted. How is his refining speed so fast? Elder Bai Tong also realized that something was wrong and hurriedly looked at Elder Wu Peng. It wasn't that they hadn't seen the scene of refining a king divine weapon before, but the current situation was truly beyond their expectations. Elder Wu Peng's brows were also furrowed. In fact, he had already noticed the abnormality just now, but he wasn't too sure. After all, even if he came personally, he might not be so fast. But now that the truth was right in front of him, he had to believe it even if he didn't want to. After a long silence, he said in a deep voice, "Even if it's a blacksmith of the same level, there will be a difference in strength due to the difference in talent and experience. Perhaps he has already tried many times before, which is why he can do it so easily today." A trace of doubt appeared on Elder Bai Tong's face. This isn't possible, right? What kind of background does he have to be able to take out so many ink gold spirit stones to practice? One had to know that if the refining failed, those materials would become a pile of trash. Elder Wu Peng pursed his lips. Of course, he knew this too. But other than that, he really couldn't think of a better reason. He had seen many blacksmithing geniuses, but they definitely wouldn't be able to do this. This person is not simple. Nanyu Xing pondered for a long time and gave a vague answer. At first, he didn't take the other party seriously, but now that he looked at it again, he had to admit that this person was indeed capable. He just didn't know what this identity was. Nanyi glanced at him and asked excitedly, "Big brother, why don't we ask him after he finishes refining?" It's rare to see such a young blacksmith. If we can be on good terms with him, it'll be good for us too, right? How could Nan Yuxing not know what she was thinking? He only glanced at her indifferently. Don't worry about these things. The only thing you have to do now is to enter the god-slaying tomb and find that thing. Nan Yi pursed her lips. She had repeated this matter so many times that her ears were about to grow calluses. She snorted and looked in that direction again. Even though Zhang Xian didn't know the other party's identity, the fact that he was able to become a king of blacksmiths meant that the other party's clan couldn't be too weak. Moreover, he was such an outstanding person. As long as he inquired a little, he would definitely be able to obtain a lot of information. Father always said that she was too picky. But in this world, there was indeed such a perfect and flawless person. Nanny placed a hand on her chest and exhaled softly, trying to calm her emotions. However, his heart was beating uncontrollably, as if it would jump out at any moment. Time passed slowly. The commotion from Tianlei's landing gradually died down. The 8 inky gold spirit stones in front of Rong Xiu had completely fused, and he had forged a preliminary armor. Only the heart protection mirror in the middle was slightly sunken in. Rong Xiu opened his eyes and, with a thought, transformed his origin power into a sharp flying knife. He held the flying knife in his hand and gently sliced it across his palm. Dark red blood instantly gushed out and dripped onto the heart protection mirror. In a short while, the sunken position was filled with his blood. Rong Xiu put away the flying knife, and golden flames leaped in his palm. The remaining blood on his hand quickly dissipated, and even the wound quickly healed. In this short period of time, the blood that was contained in the heart protection mirror had gradually seeped into the entire armor. Traces of faint red color spread out in the golden armor, fusing with the black patterns and gradually covering them. From the outside, it looked like there were faint traces of blood in the sparkling and translucent golden jade. It exuded an indescribable nobility. When the last drop of blood spread out, the smell of blood completely dissipated. The crimson lines became the strange patterns that were engraved on the inside of the armor. Rong Xiu's lips were slightly pale. However, his deep phoenix eyes became more and more focused. The light flickered and reflected in his eyes, dazzling. Is it going to end? Elder Baitong asked curiously as he raised his head to take a look. Tianlei didn't appear in the sky again. How long has it been? It shouldn't be, right? Maybe it failed. Nan Yuxing said. It wasn't as if such a situation had never happened before. He was already used to it. He was so eager to trigger Tianlei just now, so now it should be, kaboom. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard another loud bang coming from the sky. This sound was even louder than before. Then, behind the thick clouds, several more Tianlei appeared one after another. Nan Yuxing's face was a little ugly. In the next moment, those Tianlei fell again. Sparks flew everywhere. They could barely see the silhouette of the figure. Elder Wu Peng's eyes darkened. He might be able to succeed before dawn. The remaining 3 people were shocked when they heard this. But even Elder Wu Peng said so. Then, Nan Yuxing slowly clenched his fists. The other party was in such a hurry. Could it be that he also planned to enter the god-slaying mound tomorrow? Rong Xiu began to forge and carve more carefully on the armor. He spent 120% of his energy on every inch and every part to make it perfect. The night gradually faded away. When the sky started to brighten, he finally stopped what he was doing. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1630. Tianlei had completely fallen, and the dark clouds had dispersed. The flames around him also dissipated bit by bit. Only the armor in front of him was left shining brightly. Although the armor was enveloped by a ball of light, outsiders couldn't see it clearly. However, that vast and powerful aura was impossible to ignore. Elder Wu Peng and the others fell into a dead silence. They all knew very well that it was indeed a King Divine weapon. This man actually, really only used one day. No. In just one night, he had crafted an Emperor artifact. Although they were already mentally prepared, when they really witnessed everything with their own eyes, the shock in their hearts was still indescribable. Rongxiu waved his wrist lightly, and that ball of light fell into his hand and disappeared. At this moment, the sky was about to brighten, and the surroundings were shrouded in a faint layer of fog, making it hazy. Dressed in white, he stood in the misty fog, looking even more like an immortal, elegant and outstanding. Nan Yi was a little stunned. At this moment, he suddenly turned around and walked over. His footsteps were light and calm, but every step seemed to be stepping on Nan Yi's heart. Nan Yi subconsciously held her breath, and her entire body tensed up. His heart thumped wildly, and his face seemed to be on fire. She had never thought that a man who she couldn't even see clearly could control her emotions so easily. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Nan Yuxing looked at Nan Yi and saw her staring blankly ahead. He wanted to speak. However, when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly couldn't say it. He had never seen his sister reveal such an expression for anyone before. Although he was usually a little strict with her, he still doted on her in his heart. If she really liked him. As long as the other party had a decent background, such good looks, and talent as a weapon refiner, she might consider him. At the thought of this, he took a step forward and cupped his hands politely. "Sir, please wait." Rongxiu didn't stop, as if he didn't hear him at all. Nan Yuxing frowned. This man did have the right to be arrogant. But it wouldn't be good if he went overboard. He took a few steps forward and blocked Rongxiu's path. Rongxiu then stopped, looked up, and glanced at the other man. Nan Yuxing's heart skipped a beat. This man's eyes were deep and serene, like a bottomless cold lake. And this gaze was extremely cold and indifferent. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not a living person, but an insignificant object. This gaze made Nan Yuxing very uncomfortable. However, he was no longer a greenhorn, so he could still control his emotions. The smile on his face did not change. "Your Excellency, please don't misunderstand. We have no ill intentions. I am Nan Yuxing. Seeing that you are already a king of blacksmiths at such a young age, I am very impressed. I wonder if we can be friends. In the future." "No need." Before he could finish, Rongxiu had already given him a straightforward answer. After saying that, Rongxiu took a step, bypassed him, and continued to move forward. Nan Yuxing was still in a daze. It was rare for him to take the initiative to build a relationship with someone, but he was rejected. Usually, countless people wanted to talk to him and make friends with him, but they might not have the chance. This man actually, he was so angry that he laughed and turned around. "You are so arrogant." Although he was laughing, the sarcasm in his words couldn't be clearer. Rongxiu didn't even stop in his tracks. Nan Yuxing finally couldn't maintain his expression. Before he could flare up, Nan Yi had already rushed forward. "You! Wait!" She jogged over and quickly rushed in front of Rongxiu. A change finally appeared in Rongxiu's indifferent expression. His brows furrowed slightly, and a hint of impatience appeared between his brows. Nan Yi looked up and saw his face. For a moment, her mind was almost blank. Previously, she hadn't been able to see his face clearly, but now that they were only a few steps apart, she could see him clearly. His sharp eyebrows reached his temples, his phoenix-like eyes were as deep as the sea, his nose bridge was high, and his crimson lips were like the first color of spring. It was clearly an extremely cold and distant face, but there was a hint of spring in it. For a moment, he was as cold as a fairy, but in the blink of an eye, he was as charming as a demon. He could really be called a peerless beauty in the world. Suddenly, the words that Nanny had prepared were stuck in her throat and she couldn't say them. This face had such a huge impact on her that she didn't notice the impatience in Rongxiu's eyes. "Move aside." Rongxiu spoke. His voice was as cold as ice, but it also had a noble aura that couldn't be disobeyed. Almost instinctively, Nanny took a step to the side. Seeing this scene, Nan Yuxing was furious. His sister had always been fearless. Their entire family treated her like the apple of their eye, afraid that she would be aggrieved if they bumped into her. In the end, not only did this man not give her any face, he even directly ordered her to move aside. Nan Yuxing's figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside Nanny. He pulled Nanny behind him and took a step forward with a sneer. "Is the king of weapon refinement really so amazing? We are kind enough to befriend you, why do you have to be so high and mighty?" He had only given Yi some face because she liked him. Unfortunately, the other party didn't seem to appreciate it. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Rongxiu didn't have any patience for outsiders, let alone these people who had once wanted to find trouble with him. He finally looked straight at Nan Yuxing. At this moment, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Rongxiu's expression was languid, and his voice was extremely indifferent. "You've delayed my visit to my wife." Every word and sentence was filled with chilling intent. Digression: has everyone seen the news of the change in monthly votes? To put it simply, you will have to spend more Xiaoxiang dollars to get a monthly vote in the future. Moreover, each person can only give a maximum of 5 monthly votes to a book every month. There is also a limit to the number of votes per day. Non-top scorers are allowed 2 votes per day, and top scorers are allowed 5 votes per day. But the limit is 5 votes per month. If you have monthly votes, please vote as soon as possible. The change will be official in 3 days. You won't be able to bury February with a handful of monthly votes anymore. The star of monthly votes will also be changed to the star of reviews. Mwah. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1631. A coldness surged from the bottom of his heart, causing Nan Yuxing to feel cold all over. However, Nanny's attention was on a certain word. "Madam." He was already married. Nanny's heart instantly turned cold, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. "Rongxiu." At this moment, a clear female voice sounded from behind. Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi saw the man who had spoken coldly and mercilessly to them just a moment ago, looking straight ahead. In an instant, the frost in his eyes melted rapidly. What replaced it was an unconcealable gentleness and gentleness. His scarlet lips curved slightly, and there seemed to be a stream of light flickering in his deep phoenix eyes. The aura around him also became completely different. You're awake." As he spoke, he directly walked past the brother and sister and walked over. A faint cold fragrance swept past her nose. Nanny turned around in a daze and looked in the direction he had gone. Not far away, behind a few stones stood a woman. That woman was dressed in a red dress and looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. Her skin was as fair as snow. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. She was only dressed in a simple red dress, and her black hair was simply tied up. There were no extra accessories on her body, and as she stood there, she seemed to be more beautiful than a myriad of magnificent scenes. There was a smile on her lips, but her entire body was enveloped in an incomparably noble aura, revealing a noble aura from her bones. In this misty white fog, she appeared especially beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. The moment she saw the other party's face clearly, Nanyi was stunned at first, then she couldn't help but feel sour and jealous in her heart. She had always flaunted her beauty, but in front of this woman, it was the first time she felt ashamed of her inferiority. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she knew very well that the other party's beauty was indeed much better than hers. Nanyi couldn't help but look down at herself. Her clothes were luxurious and she was particular about everything. But at this moment, in contrast to the other party, she started to feel that her outfit was very cumbersome. Even when she lowered her head, the jingling dangling hair ornament on her head made her feel vexed. She was dressed up so exquisitely, but it was not as moving as the other party's bare face. Any woman would feel uncomfortable. Rong Xiao had already walked over and tucked the strands of hair by her cheek behind her ear. His movements were skillful and natural. He looked at the person in front of him, his voice low and pleasant. "Did you rest well? Did I disturb you?" Chu Luiyue shook his head and smiled. "No. Actually, I woke up when you were refining just now." Rong Xiao frowned slightly and glanced at Sheng Wanjing behind him. Sheng Wanjing shrugged helplessly. With such a huge commotion, even a barrier wouldn't be able to stop it. Originally, before Rong Xiao prepared to refine, he was worried that he would disturb her rest, so he specially set up a layer of enchantment. But from the looks of it now, it should be useless. She had always been sensitive to these things, so it was impossible for her not to have noticed it. Rong Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He took out a ball of light and handed it over. "Take a look." Chu Luiyue took the item, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. She knew that Rong Xiao was extremely talented in refining weapons. It wasn't that the two of them had never competed in this aspect before. But she basically lost. Moreover, she had never tested Rong Xiao's true strength. This was the first time she had seen Rong Xiao refine an Emperor Divine weapon with her own eyes. Others might not be able to see it clearly, but this thing was in her hands now, so she could see it clearly. It was a suit of armor. The entire body was a faint golden color, but the texture looked more like jade, but it was extremely light in the hand. "You can drip blood directly to recognize it as your master," Rong Xiao said. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly, took out a dagger, and cut her palm. Dark red blood immediately gushed out. It dripped on the armor. The armor flickered with light, and the blood was quickly swallowed and absorbed, disappearing on the surface of the armor. Extremely thin blood-colored patterns appeared inside. In an instant, Chu Luiyue sensed that there seemed to be some kind of connection between her and the armor. After that, with a flash of light, the armor quickly disappeared. Chu Luiyue blinked. The wound on her hand quickly healed, leaving only a faint pink scar. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Chu Luiyue's body, but it quickly disappeared. But she knew very well that the armor had already recognized her as its master. Then, she seemed to have sensed something, and her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Rong Xiao. Do you like it?" Rong Xiao asked with a smile. Chu Luiyue's words were suddenly stuck in her throat. After a moment, she nodded seriously. "I like everything you give me." The scene of the two talking and laughing as if there was no one else around deeply provoked Nanyi. She couldn't help but take a step forward. "You gave her the King Divine weapon that you worked so hard to refine so easily." A cold glint flashed across Rong Xiao's eyes. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the other party for the first time. In fact, she had seen and heard the scene of the siblings blocking Rong Xiao just now. It was obvious that this woman had taken a fancy to Rong Xiao. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so unforgiving. "And you? Do you know how much effort he put in to refine this? You actually accepted it with a clear conscience." As if sensing Chu Luiyue's gaze, Nanny directly aimed the cannon at Chu Luiyue. No matter what, that was a king divine weapon. She gave it away so easily. Looking at Nanny's agitated and resentful appearance, Chu Luiyue was a little amused. She raised her brows and was about to speak, but Rongxiu had already turned around. Firstly, this is a divine weapon that I refined. It's my business how I want to deal with it. Since when is it your turn to interfere? Nanny shuddered from his cold gaze and her rebuttal became softer. But, secondly, this is a gift that I specially prepared for Madam. If I don't give it to her, do I have to give it to you? Rongxiu enunciated every word, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Being stared at by his intimidating gaze, Nanny finally sensed a trace of danger. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Nan Yuxing was angry and heartbroken. He immediately stepped forward and stared at her warningly before pulling her behind him. His sister was used to being arrogant and spoke as she pleased. Even he felt embarrassed when he heard what she said just now. But this was his sister after all. How could he let her be bullied when she was outside? Nan Yuxing took a deep breath. My sister didn't mean that. You, Rongxiu didn't have any patience with the siblings and directly interrupted him. He stared coldly at Nanny. Thirdly, who do you think you are? How dare you criticize my wife? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1632. The last sentence successfully caused the expressions of the siblings to change. Nan Yuxing was both shocked and furious. He was shocked because he didn't expect the other party to be so impudent. He was angry because that man had actually said such humiliating and contemptuous words to his sister. Nanny's eyes widened in disbelief. She had been pampered and spoiled since she was young. Not to mention insults, she had never even heard a harsh word from anyone. Now that she was suddenly pointed at and scolded, she naturally took a long time to regain her senses. After she regained her senses, her face quickly flushed red. Something seemed to be surging crazily in her chest and was about to burst out from her chest. She wanted to refute, but even her voice was trembling. Because her emotions were very complicated at this moment. It was the first time she liked someone, but she didn't expect the other party to say such words before she could express her feelings. The impact was so great that she didn't even have time to be angry. She was completely stunned. Nan Yuxing hurriedly turned around to look at her. When he saw her expression, his heart ached. When had his precious sister ever suffered such grievances? Sir, aren't you going overboard with your words? Nan Yuxing raised his voice, and the aura around him began to surge. He only said a few words casually, but you're so rude. Is bullying a woman like this something a man should do? Rongxiu's brows moved slightly. She said all those things, and she deserves it. Instead of criticizing others here, why don't you go back and think about how to change your precious sister's bad habit of speaking without thinking? The other party had offended him time and time again, and he was already impatient with them. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to refine this armor, he would have already been rude to them yesterday. Nan Yuxing was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. It had been a long time since he met such an arrogant and impudent person. Yes. Such a young king of weapon refinement was indeed outstanding. But this didn't mean that they were afraid of him. Looks like you don't intend to apologize. He asked gloomily. In his words, there was already an unconcealable murderous intent surging. When Nanny saw this, she hurriedly went forward and grabbed his arm. Brother! What are you doing? Nan Yuxing frowned. He humiliated you, so I naturally planned to teach him a lesson and help you vent your anger. Of course, Nanny knew what he meant. In the past, she had often asked Big Brother for help. But it was different this time. If Big Brother beat him up, then wouldn't the other party really see her as an enemy? She was angry, aggrieved, and furious. However, he didn't want to completely fall out with the other party because of this. Big Brother had always been ruthless. If he killed or crippled someone, it's not his fault. Why did you hit him? Nanyi bit her lip and looked at Chu Luiyue with resentment. The look in his eyes was very clear. If there was someone to blame, it should be her. If it wasn't for protecting her, he definitely wouldn't have done this. Chu Luiyue. She hadn't even said a single word from the start to the end, and this hat was actually placed on her head. How could Nan Yuxing not know what his sister was thinking? It was nothing more than reluctance. Nan Yuxing really expected better from her. His words were already so harsh and his attitude was so clear, but she still refused to come to her senses. At this time, she was still speaking up for him. What the hell? He originally wanted Nan Yi to step back and make a move himself. However, Nan Yi hugged his arm tightly and refused to let go. Nan Yuxing was angry and frustrated. In the end, he could only grit his teeth and hit Nan Yi's head hard. You. In the past, he only thought that she was a little delicate and willful, but he didn't know that she could go to such an extent for a man. He was really disappointed. The atmosphere between the siblings fell into a stalemate. Eldest young master, second Mississippi. It's daybreak and the poisonous gas in the Scarlet Soul Forest has dissipated. It's time to go in. Elder Wu Ping spoke at the right time to break the stalemate. Elder Bai Tong also hurriedly acted as a peacemaker. Yes. The time it takes to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest is very short. Young master, miss, we have to hurry. The two of them said this to give them a way out. Nan Yuxing grabbed Nan Yi's wrist and headed in the direction of the Scarlet Soul Forest. Let's go. They were here because they had something important to do. As for that man who didn't know what was good for him, when everything was over, they would think of a way to deal with him. Nan Yi's wrist hurt from being grabbed and she frowned. However, she knew that her elder brother was angry at this moment and didn't dare to say anything. She could only follow them. The two elders also followed one after the other. When the two sides brushed past each other, Elder Wu Ping gave Rong Xiu a meaningful look. Rong Xiu's expression was indifferent and calm, as if he didn't take them seriously at all. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the few people's back view. Rong Xiu was considered famous in the Divine Ruins world and many big shots had seen him before. These two people seemed to be of high status, but they didn't seem to know Rong Xiu. What are you thinking about? Rong Xiu's voice sounded. Chu Luiyue looked back thoughtfully. Nothing, I just feel that their background doesn't seem simple. The four of them concealed their auras very well, but her intuition told her that they shouldn't be weak. More importantly, they had witnessed Rong Xiu refining a king divine weapon with their own eyes, but they didn't seem to be very shocked. One had to know that the people from the major sects and families had directly fallen out with Lingxiao College in order to fight for the Scarlet Heaven Sword and Blue Feathers Abyss. At that time, they had thought that the Scarlet Heaven Sword was a king divine weapon. It could be seen how important and noble a king divine weapon was to these people, so much so that they would pay a huge price to fight for it. But these people, from the beginning to the end, they didn't seem to covet the king divine weapon at all. In this situation, they either knew that they couldn't win, so they didn't even have any thoughts about it, or, this thing wasn't that precious to them. Judging from their arrogant attitude, it shouldn't be the first case. But if it was the second case, then it would be interesting. Chu Luiyue had been in the Divine Ruins world for a long time and knew that king divine weapons were extremely precious to many families, even first-rate families. What kind of background did these people have? They were actually like this, that black-clothed old man should be a weapon refining supremacy. Shengguan Jing retracted his gaze and muttered. Just now, he had been staying behind a few stones, and the conflict had been between Rong Xiao and Chu Luiyue, so those people didn't pay much attention to him. A weapon refining supremacy is the follower of those two. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Interesting. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1633. She stretched out her finger and gently tapped Rong Xiao's chest. She smiled mischievously. Rong Xiao, maybe she really is a young lady from a certain family and has an extraordinary background. Even a girl like her fell in love with you at first sight. It's clear that you're still as powerful as before. Back then, Rong Xiao was still a young man. He was still a bit immature, but he was already the dream boy of countless girls. On the first day he entered Lingxiao College, he attracted the attention of almost half of the girls in the college. Now that a few years had passed, he had grown from a young man to a man. His appearance was enchanting, and his temperament was noble. Even Chu Luiyue couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This man's every movement was even more magnificent than before. Rong Xiao glanced at her indifferently, grabbed her hand, and suddenly moved closer. The two breathed together, and they could almost feel each other's hot breath. A cold fragrance lingered around them, adding to the charm and gentleness. The two clearly didn't move closer. Being stared at by Rong Xiao's bottomless eyes and enveloped by his aura, Chu Luiyue inexplicably felt her face heat up. His movements were very restrained and polite. Only she knew how unbridled and aggressive his gaze was at this moment. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His gaze was so intense that it almost forced her to subconsciously turn her face away. "Do you smell something?" Rong Xiao suddenly asked. His voice had always been deep and pleasant. At this moment, the two of them were very close. He deliberately lowered his voice, so it was more like he was whispering into her ear. Chu Luiyue felt as if she was even hotter. "What's that smell?" Rong Xiao raised his eyebrows. "It's so sour." Chu Luiyue suddenly came back to her senses. She glared at him angrily, then pushed him away. She snorted and turned to leave. A certain someone was really getting more and more arrogant. Rong Xiao was pushed away, but he was not angry. He only laughed. Chu Luiyue instantly quickened his pace. Only then did Rong Xiao lift his feet and follow him unhurriedly. Do you really not smell it?" Chu Luiyue pretended not to hear anything. Shengguan Jing looked at the sky speechlessly. He smelled the sour stench of love. Soon, Nan Yuxing and the others arrived at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Just as he was about to enter, he heard footsteps behind him. Nan Yuxing turned around and frowned. Why are they here? He felt even more disgusted and couldn't help but sneer. You were so arrogant just now, why are you chasing after me now? I'm telling you in advance that we won't pursue the matter from before for the sake of my little sister. But if you continue to pester us, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Luiyue looked at him strangely. This. Young master, are you misunderstanding something? We're just going to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb. We're not in the mood to continue arguing with you. Nan Yuxing's face turned ugly. That man's words were extremely unpleasant, but he didn't expect this woman to be the same. She had a sharp tongue and didn't know what was good for her. He clenched his fists and his voice was even colder. You're going in too. The God-slaying tomb is extremely dangerous. Why are you going there for no reason? He had thought that they had specially come to this deserted place to refine Emperor Divine weapons, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. Chu Luiyue almost laughed out loud. Are the Red Soul Forest and the God-slaying tomb your territory? Only you can enter, and others can't. Isn't this too unreasonable? Nan Yuxing was speechless. He was indeed in no position to stop the fun here. But Nan Yi suddenly crossed her arms and sneered. Of course it's because there's something wrong with you. We were about to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb, but you followed us. The God-slaying tomb is vast and there are countless places to enter. Why did we meet you here? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? As long as she wasn't fighting with Rong Xiu, her combat strength wasn't weak. Moreover, she had already regarded Chu Luiyue as her enemy in her heart. When they spoke, it was naturally tit for tat. Oh, so that's how it is. It does sound reasonable. Chu Luiyue nodded as if she agreed with him and changed the topic. But it seems that we were here first. If there's a problem, it should be you, right? Nan Yi was stunned. She wanted to say something, but suddenly remembered that the other party seemed to have been here before they came. It didn't feel good to be in the wrong when they were in the right. Nan Yuxing also frowned. So, it was really just a coincidence? Even so, we have to go in from here now. Go somewhere else and don't go with us. His tone was very hard, as if he was ordering someone. Chu Luiyue felt that it was even more interesting. These two siblings seemed to have a screw loose in their heads. She didn't know if it was because they had been in a superior position for a long time and were used to ordering people around, but every word they said could successfully disgust her. Do you usually control the world like this? Chu Luiyue couldn't suppress the curiosity in her heart and asked sincerely. Nan Yuxing and the others were embarrassed. So, you don't want to do as I say? Nan Yuxing's voice seemed to carry a hint of threat. Chu Luiyue smiled and her eyes curved. She stretched out her hand and pointed at Nan Yi, saying very sincerely. Speaking of pestering, isn't it your precious sister who has been pestering my husband? I think the ones who should take the initiative to leave are you, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1634. Tuanzi buried its head in her shoulder and rubbed against her. Then it reluctantly let go of her hand. Then you will miss me every day. Chu Luiyue kissed her face. Dumpling jumped down from her arms, snorted at Yu Qian, and turned to leave. Yu Qian looked at Wan Jianfeng. Go and arrange her residence. Yes. In fact, this matter should have been handled by Jin Yunlai. But because of Mu Yafeng's matter, almost all of his authority had been taken away. Even such a matter was handed over to the fifth divine emissary. Chu Luiyue watched Dumpling leave. Yu Qian was obviously worried about her. He had been following behind her, as if he wanted to personally send her back to Fengming Mountain. Chu Luiyue raised her eyes slightly. The light barrier between the illusory God Palace and Fengming Mountain fell from the sky, flickering with a faint glow. She had always thought that this barrier couldn't be passed, but now it seemed that it didn't cause any obstruction to Dumpling. This was much more convenient. Shangguanyu, come with me. She put away her thoughts and smiled at Wan Jianfeng. Sorry to trouble you, fifth divine emissary. Wan Jianfeng didn't say anything and walked in a certain direction. Chu Luiyue immediately followed. When he passed by Jin Yunlai, he suddenly said, Wait. Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks and turned to look at him. Seventh divine emissary. I have a question for you. Jin Yunlai said, staring at her eyes, as if trying to see something from them. The last Xian formation wasn't included in the mythical flame diagram. How did you crack it? This last Xian formation was undoubtedly the most difficult one on the entire star path. Even he had spent a lot of time and energy to barely crack it back then. Even after that, he had spent several years and tried countless times before he finally managed to successfully unleash it. But what about Chu Luiyue? She had only been in the illusory god palace for a few months. From the heaven gate to the illusory god palace, she had deciphered the countless profound formations on this star road one by one. Even though she had seen some of them before, such efficiency was simply too shocking. Or even illusory. Jin Yunlai asked himself. Even now, he might not be able to cast the last Xian formation as quickly and smoothly as her. Chu Luiyue looked at him with clear eyes and a sincere expression. Is that very difficult? Jin Yunlai choked. For a moment, he felt that Chu Luiyue was mocking him. But in the next moment, Chu Luiyue laughed. That profound formation indeed did not appear on the mythical flame diagram because there was no need for it to be included. That Xian formation looked complicated, but in fact, it was just a collection of the Xian formations from before on the Star Road. Since the previous ones could be broken, how difficult would the last one be? Jin Yunlai's heart skipped a beat, and his entire body froze on the spot. Chu Luiyue's lips curved slightly. Without another word, she turned and followed Wang Jianfeng. Patriarch Nan, let's meet another day. The flesh on Nan Jinchu's face trembled violently. At this moment, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt someone's gaze on her. She paused in her steps and looked up. In the distance, in front of the main hall of the illusory god palace, a person was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at her from afar. Jun Zhuqing. When did he come? Most importantly, he seemed to have come from the main hall. However, Jun Zhuqing's expression was different from before. In the past, he always had a smile on his lips, but now, his face was calm and expressionless. He seemed to be looking at her, but his eyes seemed to be unfocused. In short, it felt a little strange. Suli followed her line of sight and explained softly, Jun Zhuqing entered the main hall of the illusory god palace some time ago, but no one knows what he went there for. They didn't even know why Jun Zhuqing was qualified to enter the main hall. Chu Luiyue nodded and retracted her gaze. It seemed that although Jun Zhuqing and Nan Jinshu both had special privileges, Jun Zhuqing was still better. She just didn't know, where did their special privileges come from? In the dark and cramped cell, Dugu Mabao slowly opened his eyes. In the end, this day had still come. Although that person unilaterally tore the contract and caused the time to be brought forward, she didn't disappoint him. Everything that happened before wasn't wasted. In another cell, Lan Xiao was sitting on the ground with one leg bent and leaning against the wall. The air was filled with the faint smell of blood. He lowered his head to take a look. The wound on his arm was already gradually healing. After all, it was a divine body tempered by the golden Tianlei, so it naturally wouldn't be damaged so easily. His recovery ability after injury was also quite good. Looks like it's really soon. He touched his chin and chuckled softly. This chuckle affected the wound at the corner of his mouth, causing him to hiss in pain. He licked his lips and leaned his head slightly against the wall. Although it was dark all around and almost nothing could be seen, there was still a faint glow in his eyes. Chu Luiyue and Suli followed Wang Jianfeng all the way. Along the way, Suli would explain to her in a low voice from time to time. She had been here for quite some time and was quite familiar with it. Chu Luiyue listened as she walked. Suddenly, she stopped and looked in a certain direction. Where is that? Suli followed her line of sight. That's the residence of the seventh oracle. Chu Luiyue shook her head. No, I'm talking about the courtyard at the back. Suli was stunned. Wang Jianfeng suddenly turned around and looked at her. How do you know there's another courtyard there? Chapter 1635. She had too many advantages, like a dazzling pearl. He only wanted to hold her in his hands and monopolize her. Of course, he knew that this was just wishful thinking, because she deserved a wider world and a more prosperous scenery. Then, he could only choose one and say it more obviously. As long as she stood here, she had already won. Why should he waste any more effort? Chu Liuyue's eyes flickered when she heard that. She had to admit that when this man said such words, it was always easier to move her heart. Cough. Sheng Wanjing, who had been ignored and never paid attention to, coughed hard. He began to feel that it was a mistake for him to follow them. It was clear that the two of them didn't do anything. They only looked at each other a few times and talked to each other. Today's waist hug was the most intimate action between the two of them during this period of time. It could be said that he had restrained himself to the extreme. However, Sheng Wanjing still felt that he was very, very redundant. What a miscalculation. Rong Xiao and Chu Luyue looked over at the same time. At the same time, Rong Xiao's fingertips gently rubbed her back twice, then he tactfully retracted his hand. Chu Luyue, she gave Rong Xiao a warning look. Control yourself. Rong Xiao raised his eyebrows. Am I not restrained enough? Chu Luyue, Sheng Wanjing looked up at the sky. Cough, I think it's about time. Can we prepare to enter the Scarlet Soul Forest? The weather was clear and there were no clouds in the sky. The Scarlet Soul Forest, which looked especially eerie in the darkness last night, looked much more normal now. Black trees stood tall. Occasionally, thick roots would be revealed, and they were also completely black. The red leaves swayed in the wind, like a scene at the end of autumn that was about to wither. However, the strange thing was that there were no leaves on the ground in the forest. Not a single one. In a normal forest, there would be a thick layer of fallen leaves, but here, it was flat and clean. Looking at it like this, it was inevitable that one would find it strange. Let's go. After Sheng Wanjing finished speaking, he took the lead and entered. Chu Luyue glanced at the swaying red leaves. He narrowed his eyes and walked in. Sheng Wanjing took the lead, followed by Chu Luyue. Rong Xiao was one step behind her and was at the end of the line. The soil on the ground was reddish-brown and very soft. Stepping on it would not make any sound. The forest was very quiet. Other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, there was no other sound. They could even hear each other's breathing. In the Scarlet Soul Forest, one cannot use origin power, nor can one fly. One can only walk forward step by step. As Sheng Wanjing walked, he patiently explained some things to pay attention to. Although it's a lot slower, it's safer. To walk through the Scarlet Soul Forest, it would take about 4 hours. We should be able to leave this place before the poison gas spreads again. Chu Luyue listened from the back and responded obediently. Then, he couldn't help but ask, Taizu, you've been to the God-slaying tomb before. Why, have I never heard you mention it? The point was that he seemed to know this place better than others. What had he experienced here in the past? Taizu pondered for a while before he spoke again. In fact, there's nothing I can't say. It's just that the last time I came here, I didn't have a good memory, so I didn't mention it to you. No one was willing to take the initiative to recall and mention those unhappy memories. This time, if Chu Luyue had not been forced here by the other party, he would not have mentioned it. Chu Luyue frowned slightly. She had never seen Taizu like this. It should be. What happened here really made it hard for him to let go. Taizu, if you don't want to say it, actually, Sheng Wanjing waved his hand and suddenly laughed. It's nothing. It's been so many years. He paused for a while before he continued. That year, before I went to the northern region of Untainted Land, the last place I stayed was the God-slaying tomb. Chu Luiyue was a bit shocked. Didn't this mean that Taizu went to the northern region of untainted land from here? But these two places were famous for being dangerous in the world of divine ruins. Why did he? When I came to the world of divine ruins, I didn't belong to any sect, but I was arrogant. After I defeated 7 weapon refining supremacies, I became even more famous and attracted many people to follow me, but also caused a lot of hatred. Since I had already established the heavenly order, I naturally didn't want to establish a sect here. I wanted to be alone, so I rejected all the followers. But I met a friend and we had a good chat. He wasn't a weapon refining master, just an ordinary martial artist with average talent. He stayed at the high god level for many years and still couldn't break through. But he was open-minded and I admired him. I heard that he was also a person outside the world of divine ruins and came here alone, so I appreciated him and treated him as a close friend. Later, he heard that there was a supreme treasure in the god-slaying tomb that could help him break through to the god level, so he was a bit eager to try. I heard that this place was dangerous, so I decided to come with him. If I could help him break through to the god level, I would be able to get rid of a knot in his heart. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue had already guessed something. Sure enough, Taizu heaved a long sigh. Unfortunately, I treated him like a close friend, but he was just using me. After we came here, we went through a lot of difficulties and finally found that thing. But whoosh. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. In the Crimson Soul Forest, a mournful whimper sounded from afar. Digression. See you tomorrow, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1636. Chu Luiyue's heart tightened. He looked up at the forest, but found that the sound seemed to be coming from all directions, and he couldn't tell where it was coming from. Shengguanjing frowned and said, "Don't worry. Those are just vengeful spirits in the Scarlet Soul Forest." Vengeful spirits. That's right. The so-called vengeful spirits are the souls of those cultivators who wanted to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest and enter the god-slaying tomb. Because they were trapped here, they are full of resentment and resentment. However, these souls don't have their own will and consciousness. As long as we don't use force, we won't be discovered by them and can pass through safely. Chu Luiyue nodded thoughtfully. I see. The whimpering sound was mournful and miserable, as if it was right beside them. When the sound clearly fell into their ears, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. It wasn't hard to imagine how miserable and pitiful these people were when they died in the Scarlet Soul Forest. Fortunately, the 3 of them were mentally strong and weren't disturbed by the whimpering sound. They continued forward. However, after being disturbed by the sound, Shengguanjing didn't continue speaking. Chu Luiyue didn't ask any more questions. Taizu had always been free and easy. Chu Luiyue could see that the incident back then had a deep impact on him. So much so that today, 1,000 years later, he still didn't want to mention it. He probably hadn't completely let it go. In fact, it was understandable if he thought about it carefully. At that time, Taizu was alone in the Divine Ruins world and only regarded this person as a friend. It was almost a trust that he could entrust his life to. However, the other party betrayed him for a treasure. No matter who it was, they wouldn't feel good about such a thing. However, Chu Luiyue still had a small question in his heart. At that time, Taizu was already a venerable artificer. This status was much higher than that of the venerable god and the doctor of the same level. Then, why did that person choose to betray Taizu and kill Taizu just for a treasure that could help a cultivator break through from the high god to the venerable god? On one hand, Taizu had no interest in this thing. On the other hand, even if he obtained the treasure and successfully became a god, he would still be slightly inferior to Taizu. Why did he have to be so decisive? However, since Taizu did not continue, Chu Luiyue did not ask further. For Taizu, every time he mentioned it, it was a process of tearing open the scars of his wounds. She pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Suppressing the doubts and emotions in her heart, she continued to move forward with Taizu. There were a few times when Chu Luiyue's ears hurt from the sobbing. She even felt that someone was standing beside her, ready to kill her at any time. But in the end, she controlled herself and ignored it, burying her head in the front. After walking for an unknown period of time, the mournful and shrill sobbing sound finally subsided. Chu Luiyue heaved a sigh of relief. The sound was endless and did not dissipate for a long time. No one knew how many people had died here, and no one knew how many skeletons were buried under this seemingly flat and clean ground. A gust of wind blew, and the leaves rustled. Chu Luiyue looked up. On the black trees, countless red leaves swayed in the wind. As she got closer, she could clearly see the veins on one of the leaves. They were not the veins of a normal leaf, but the shape of a human bone. A gust of cold air surged up from the soles of her feet. Chu Luiyue calmly withdrew her gaze, but the scene of the leaves swaying in the wind like bloody palms last night appeared in her mind. So, the Red Soul Forest was not even within the range of the God-slaying mound, but it was already so terrifying and dangerous. What kind of danger awaited them when they entered the God-slaying mound? We're almost out of here. At this moment, Taizu's words interrupted Chu Luiyue's thoughts. She looked up in the direction of the voice and found that the edge of the forest was faintly visible. In about half an hour, they should be able to get out. Chu Luiyue did not dare to let down her guard. She followed Taizu even more cautiously. As long as they could, a sharp scream suddenly broke the silence in the forest. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. This was not the voice of a vengeful spirit, but of a human. And it sounded familiar. Chu Luiyue and the rest turned their heads and looked in the direction of the voice. Then, they saw a few familiar figures. It was Nan Yuxing and the rest. They seemed to have encountered some danger and were running towards them quickly. As they ran, they would turn their heads from time to time, as if they were afraid that something would catch up with them. Taizu could not help but curse. At this time, they were about to successfully leave this place, but trouble came looking for them again. Let's go. Taizu immediately shouted. He grabbed Chu Luiyue's wrist and quickly headed out of the forest. Rong Xiao also quickly caught up and followed behind the two of them. Wait! You guys! Nan Yuxing and the rest were originally in a terrible state. When they suddenly saw the figures in front of them, they did not care about anything else and immediately shouted. Help us! We will definitely thank you. As the distance between the two parties was not too close and there were trees in the forest, they did not see clearly that Chu Luiyue and the rest were in front of them. Chu Luiyue frowned. Hearing Nan Yuxing's anxious voice and the scream from Nan Yi just now, it was not difficult to deduce that they were definitely in trouble now. However, because Taizu's reaction was extremely fast, she did not see the specific situation over there clearly. However, it was precisely because Taizu's reaction was fast and strong that she was even more certain that this was definitely not a good thing. Thinking about how arrogant those people were before they came in. Now that even they were forced to this point, it was obvious that they were in trouble. They were about to get out safely. If they were dragged down by others at this time, Chu Luiyue was not sure if she would have the intention to kill them. However, because they could not use force in the forest, their speed did not increase by much. On the other hand, Nan Yuxing and the rest were already forced into a life-and-death situation. How could they care so much? They only knew how to use their full speed to attack. The distance between the two parties was rapidly shrinking. Chu Luiyue could even hear the strange rustling sound behind her. She could not help but look back. The moment she saw it, her pupils immediately shrank. In the forest, Nan Yuxing and the rest were fleeing in a sorry state. Nan Yi looked panicked and her face was full of tears. There was also an additional wound on her left shoulder. Although it had been reluctantly bandaged with gauze, a dark red color still seeped out. The two elders were protecting them from behind, but they did not seem to be in good condition either. And behind them, several scarlet leaves were rapidly approaching. Wherever those leaves passed, they actually tore open black spatial cracks. It was as if they would swallow them up at any time. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1637. Things had developed to this stage, and it was beyond Nan Yuxing and the rest's expectations. At that time, Nan Yi was so agitated by Rong Xiu's words that she couldn't take it anymore and ran away crying. After Nan Yuxing chased after her, he saw that Nan Yi had unknowingly run to the edge of the Scarlet Soul Forest. He was worried and wanted to bring her back immediately. Although the Scarlet Soul Forest wasn't difficult for them, it would definitely be dangerous for Nan Yi to go in alone in her current state. Nan Yuxing wanted to persuade her to come back before they went in with the two elders. However, Nan Yi was so agitated that she plunged into the Scarlet Soul Forest without thinking. In fact, Nan Yuxing caught up very quickly. However, the crux of the matter was that when Nan Yi barged into the Scarlet Soul Forest, the force in her body was surging violently. This time, they were in trouble. When Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Ping caught up, something was wrong with the surroundings. Not long after, those leaves fell and started to attack Nan Yi. The injury on her shoulder was caused at that time. After that, they had no choice but to deal with the danger while desperately running outside. Fortunately, these two elders, including Nan Yuxing, weren't weak, so they were barely able to hold on until now. It wasn't easy for them to see someone, so they wanted to ask for help. They didn't expect the other party to run away after hearing their call for help. Nan Yuxing's resentment finally reached its peak when he saw the faces of those people. "Why are you guys here?" His expression changed drastically, and even his footsteps slowed down. Chu Luiyue found it funny. They were the ones who ran over and even brought the danger over, yet they still had the cheek to ask such a question. "Ignore them." Taizu turned back and saw those red leaves crazily strangling them. He frowned and turned to leave at an even faster speed. Seeing them leave without a word, Nan Yuxing was even more resentful. If they hadn't bullied Yi, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Originally, everything was well prepared, but now, there was endless trouble. It wasn't that they didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the Scarlet Soul Forest. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. Since things had already come to this, he might as well drag them down with him. If they couldn't leave this place, then, the other party had to stay as well. Thinking of this, Nan Yuxing suddenly increased his speed. This time, the origin power aura on his body became even denser. Even the leaves on the surrounding trees began to fall and rush towards him. Rong Xiu glanced back when he noticed the commotion behind him. A cold killing intent flashed through his eyes. His hand moved slightly, but Taizu suddenly shouted at him to stop. "Rong Xiu! Don't use your force." They were about to leave, and if they attacked now, all their efforts would be for naught. Rong Xiu's eyes narrowed dangerously. In the end, he suppressed his urge and did not make a move. At this moment, Nan Yuxing had already arrived in front of them. Chi! His body had been scratched by the leaves and was bleeding profusely. But he didn't care. With a flash of cold light, a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand, and he went straight for Rong Xiu. But just as the sword was about to pierce Rong Xiu, Nan Yuxing suddenly tilted his wrist, changed the direction, and attacked Chu Luiyue. He was here for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, Rong Xiu's eyes seemed to be surging with turbulent waves. However, just as he was about to make a move, a reddish-gold light suddenly flashed in front of Chu Luiyue. Nan Yuxing only saw a blur in front of him, and a girl who looked no more than 3 or 4 years old suddenly appeared in front of him. The girl was petite and wore a reddish-gold lotus leaf dress. Her 2 white little feet were bare, and her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string and a golden bell. She was very beautiful and cute. Her large, grape-like eyes made her look even more innocent. Nan Yuxing frowned subconsciously. Why did such a little girl suddenly appear? Could it be the child of these 2? But if that was the case, how did they hide this child before? You're so annoying. Before he could figure it out, he heard the little girl in front of him suddenly speak. She fiddled with the bell on her head. Her expression was innocent, but there was also a hint of laziness and indifference. Nan Yuxing was stunned at first, but then a fierce look flashed across his face. Who cares who she is? Since she's with those people, I'll just kill her. He did not stop moving, and the sharp blade pierced straight ahead. When the sword fell, it would definitely pierce through the little girl's heart. Dumpling finally stopped fiddling with the bell and looked forward. The tip of the sword was already a fist's distance away from her forehead. Her hair was blown up by the cold wind, and the corner of her dress swayed. Nan Yuxing's lips curled into a cold smile. However, in the next moment, the expression on his face suddenly froze. Because his sword had suddenly stopped. The other end of the sharp blade was grabbed by a chubby little hand. Nan Yuxing did not react for a moment. This little girl had actually blocked his attack with her bare hands. How was this possible? Although he had not used his full strength, he had definitely used 70 to 80% of it. Such a child, how could, crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard. Nan Yuxing watched as his sword was forcibly broken by the other party's little hand. In the next moment, before he could react, the little figure in front of him suddenly approached rapidly. So fast. Nan Yuxing was shocked. He did not sense any fluctuation of force from the other party at all. How could she have such a fast movement technique? However, he no longer had time to think about this. Bang! A dull sound was heard. An intense pain quickly spread from his lower abdomen. Dumpling had directly approached and punched Nan Yuxing's body. Nan Yuxing's hand unconsciously loosened, and the sword fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, his body flew backwards and landed heavily on the ground. Big brother. Eldest young master. Nan Yi and the rest were shocked when they saw this scene. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing's body was bent into the shape of a shrimp. He felt that several of his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were squeezed into a ball. He was in so much pain that he did not know if they had ruptured. His face was pale, and he was covered in cold sweat. He almost fainted. In a daze, there was only one thought left in his mind. That little girl, who exactly is she? She actually has such a strong combat ability. Whoosh, a rustling sound could be heard. Nan Yuxing opened his eyes with difficulty, and to his horror, he saw countless red leaves coming towards him. Ah! A shrill scream resounded in the forest. Tuanzi spread out her hands and shrugged helplessly. I already said that you are very annoying. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1638. Dumpling was a crimson gold heavenly phoenix, and she had already opened her 4th meridian. Although she looked like a white and tender ball of flesh, in reality, her physical strength was extremely strong. She wouldn't care even if 100 swords attacked her at the same time, let alone a single sword. She didn't need to use force. A gentle punch was enough to kill the other party. Nanya Xing was already injured, and he looked down on Dumpling. If he wasn't dealt with, who would be dealt with? Nan Yi and the rest panicked when they saw Nanya Xing's figure being swallowed by the red leaves. They couldn't care less about the danger and rushed over. They didn't even have the time and energy to get angry. All they could think of was to save Nanya Xing as soon as possible. If they were too late, then, Dumpling, let's go. Chu Luiyue waved at Dumpling. Hey! I'm coming. Dumpling replied happily. She immediately turned around and ran toward Chu Luiyue. Tuanzi originally wanted to throw herself into her arms, but when she caught a glimpse of the corner of her white clothes, she restrained herself. Well done. A cold voice came from above. Dumpling widened her eyes in shock and looked at Rongxiu in disbelief. His expression was calm, but there was a rare look of admiration in his eyes. This, was he praising her? Dumpling blinked, but Rongxiu had already looked away. Her eyes darted around as she tried to pull Chu Luiyue's sleeves with her small hands. Chu Luiyue grabbed her hand. Tuanzi hurriedly glanced at Rongxiu and saw him raise his brows, but he did not say anything. Did he agree? Oh! Dumpling was overjoyed. She could finally be together with Ah Yu openly. She hurriedly grabbed Chu Luiyue's hand tightly and followed her step by step, not forgetting to ask, Ah Yu, did I perform well just now? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. After so many years, Dumpling had broken through from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to her current appearance. Her strength and bloodline had increased tremendously, but her personality was still the same as before. Every time he did something, he would always rush over excitedly to claim credit. Chu Luiyue pinched her nose. Well done. A big smile bloomed on Dumpling's face. Hee. If he had known that the reward this time would be so good, he would have thrown a few more punches just now. If Nanya Xing knew what Dumpling was thinking, he would probably vomit blood. Just to hold hands with his master and talk to him, he beat him to death. The most important thing was that he could really fight. In this Crimson Soul Forest, all the cultivators didn't dare to use their origin power arbitrarily. Once they did, it was a risk of life and death. However, there was one person who was able to defeat all of them just by relying on his physical strength alone. Was there any justice in this world? Of course, Chu Luiyue and the rest weren't interested in knowing what happened to Nanya Xing and the rest. After walking for a short distance, the sky finally brightened up. Shengguan Jing finally said, "We're out." Hearing Taizu's voice, Chu Luiyue took a step forward. At this moment, she clearly felt that everything around her seemed to have changed subtly. Without the cover of the forest, the sunlight poured down without restraint. Chu Luiyue squinted slightly. After getting used to the light, she looked ahead. In the wilderness, as far as the eye could see, countless broken tombstones were scattered everywhere. They had entered the Crimson Soul Forest since noon and took about 4 hours to come out. It was still afternoon, when the sun was still shining. However, at a glance, the scene in front of them sent chills down their spines. So this is the Godslayer tomb, Chu Luiyue muttered softly. The Godslayer tomb was indeed a graveyard. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in the sky. The warm and bright sunlight was blocked outside. No matter how good the weather was, it was still cold and bleak here. A gloomy aura was looming. This is only the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Those who died here were all exalted gods. Shengguan Jing explained. Chu Luiyue held her breath slightly. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of tombstones here. And these were all exalted gods. More importantly, with their strength, they could only be at the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Then what was deeper inside? after passing through here and entering the center of the Godslayer tomb, you will find the tombs of exalted gods. Shengguan Jing's voice was very calm. But in Chu Liuyue's ears, every word was like thunder. The tombs of exalted gods. How many had died to be called a tomb? She only knew that the Godslayer tomb was a dangerous place where many exalted gods were buried, but she didn't know the truth was so horrifying. One had to know that in the entire Ling Shao Academy, the number of supreme gods that were still alive did not exceed the number of fingers on one hand. But there were so many buried here. Tens of thousands of years ago, a bloody battle broke out here. It was said that the battle lasted for 81 days. Countless top exalted gods died in the battle and were buried here in the end. That's how the Godslayer tomb came to be. Shengguan Jing seemed to have seen Chu Liuyue's confusion and explained patiently. It was said that at that time, the divine ruins world was full of force. Exalted gods were not numerous, but there were many of them. That's why so many peerless exalted gods were implicated in that bloody battle, and they all died here together. That's why the battle was so fierce. Almost all the exalted gods and souls were destroyed. Even their treasures and cultivation arts were all destroyed. That's why the Godslayer tomb has become a notorious place of evil over the years. Shengguan Jing sighed as if he found it a pity. Because of that battle, countless inheritances were broken. Chu Liyue frowned and couldn't help but ask, then why did such a fierce battle break out at that time? It sounded like it wasn't a conflict between a few forces, but many people were involved. Shengguan Jing pondered for a moment. It's been tens of thousands of years. How do the descendants know? It's just that, when I came here that year, I accidentally found some clues. They seemed to be fighting over a book. Chu Liyue was stunned. A book? What kind of book? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1639. I don't know about that. Shengguan Jing shook his head. The battle back then was full of mysteries to the later generations. It was already extremely rare to be able to inadvertently find a clue. As for the rest, it was even more difficult for him to find out more. Chu Liyue thought about it and agreed. Everyone in the world didn't know about it, let alone Taizu, an outsider. Moreover, he came here back then to accompany that friend of his to find something. It was an accident that he knew about this. Since most of those people's treasures were destroyed, then what was left should be extraordinary, right? Chu Liyue finally couldn't help but ask. Taizu, is the thing you were looking for really just to help a high god expert break through to the venerable god realm? Taizu was stunned, then frowned. He had never thought about this. Every time he thought of the god-slaying mound, he would recall the pain of being betrayed. That was why he had tried his best not to think about it all these years. There were many things that had happened during that time that he had not thought about in detail. However, after hearing Chu Liuyue's words, he realized that something was indeed wrong. In the Divine Ruins world, there were countless cultivators who were trapped in the high god realm for their entire lives and could not advance further. Because at this stage of cultivation, it was already time to rely on talent. No matter how diligent one was, without talent and comprehension, one would not be able to successfully break through. Therefore, when he heard that there was such a treasure back then, he did not hesitate to follow that person. At that time, he only thought that that person wanted it, and he had never doubted it. But now that he thought about it, there was indeed something wrong everywhere. He didn't need that thing, and he wouldn't fight with that person. Why did that person want to kill him? One had to know that if he died, that person would lose a top-notch weapon refining venerable. This could only prove that the value of that thing, in that person's eyes, was higher than that of a weapon refining venerable. And such an item was rare in the world. Shengguan suddenly felt that his memories of the past seemed to be covered by a layer of gauze, and they became unclear. The truth that he believed back then, perhaps, there was something else going on. Shengguan heart beat violently. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed his emotions. Perhaps, he paused for a moment but didn't continue. Instead, he changed the topic. Forget it, let's talk about this later. He looked at Chu Luiyue. That person told you to come to the God-slaying mound, but did he specify the meeting place? Chu Luiyue looked into the distance. He didn't say it explicitly. But I should be able to reach it with the guidance of the sea buckthorn wooden token. The other party had put in so much effort to lure her here, so there was no way he would refuse to see her. Tomorrow is the day we meet. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment. Perhaps, he will only appear tomorrow. Shengguan thought about it and felt that it made sense. Then, should we wait here, or, let's go inside and take a look? Chu Luiyue stared straight ahead, slowly clenching his fists in his sleeves. She had a premonition. The other party definitely had a motive for inviting her here. Then, what is it? They officially entered the God-slaying mound. Broken tombstones were scattered everywhere, and there were no bones to be seen. Tens of thousands of years of wind, frost, and snow had already sharpened everything. Chu Luiyue walked through, glancing at the tombstones. She could see that there used to be words carved on them, but now, those words had been eroded by time and became blurred. Most of them only had faint traces left. After walking for a while, Chu Luiyue felt that the heat on her body had been swallowed up silently. The surrounding cold air silently engulfed her. Without these tombstones, no one would know that under this vast and desolate land, there were countless skeletons of strong masters of the supreme gods. Their moods seemed to have been affected by the atmosphere. They walked forward quietly. Even Dumpling, who had always been cheerful and noisy, noticed something at this time. She grabbed Chu Luiyue's hand, pursed her lips, and followed without saying a word. After walking for a while, Chu Luiyue frowned more and more. She pondered for a long time, and finally spoke. Taizu, do you know who set up these tombstones? If it was a descendant, why were these tombstones broken? Taizu paused, and his voice was much lower. They should have been set up by the strong masters who participated in the war back then. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. They had set up tombstones without even fighting. This was the determination to die. No wonder the war back then was so tragic. So many strong masters of the supreme gods had been killed in their souls. What kind of book could cause them to act like this? Chu Luiyue could not figure it out. Perhaps only those people back then knew the answer. Crack. Something bumped against her foot. Chu Luiyue looked down and saw a fist-sized rock that seemed to have rolled over from the side. Chu Luiyue was deep in thought just now, so she didn't notice it. However, this rock was very ordinary, and it didn't hurt when it hit her foot. Moreover, it stopped there. Chu Luiyue didn't take it to heart. She continued walking forward. Not long after, another rock rolled over. This time, Chu Luiyue saw it in advance. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Because this rock was also coming for her. She didn't move. She only took a step to the side when the rock was about to rush over. The rock rolled past her previous position, but it quickly stopped. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. She could clearly see that this rock wasn't obstructed at all. It stopped on its own. What's wrong? Shengguan sensed that something was wrong with her and turned to ask. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything and looked around. Although there were many broken tombstones scattered here, it was flat and spacious. Why was there a rock rolling towards her out of nowhere? And there was more than one. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Luiyue heard a soft sound behind her. She turned to look. As expected, another rock was heading straight for her. Digression: when I woke up in the morning, I realized that my lousy laptop had automatically deleted my writing software. Fortunately, I installed it in my new laptop before. Ha 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 ha. After tossing and turning for a while, it was 12:30 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read, a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1640. Then, a second piece, and a third piece. The surrounding stones seemed to be guided by some kind of power. They all became restless and moved toward Chu Luiyue. This is, Shengguan Jing was also stunned. He had never encountered such a situation when he came here before. More importantly, this movement was obviously coming for Chu Luiyue. What was going on? Rong Xiu frowned slightly and held Chu Luiyue's hand. We have to leave as soon as possible. These stones are all from the broken tombstones of the supreme gods. Being chased by broken tombstones was already uncomfortable enough. Moreover, these were all supreme gods' tombstones. Not to mention that these stones might contain a certain amount of power. No one could be sure about that. Therefore, Rong Xiu made a prompt decision to leave with Chu Luiyue immediately. Chu Luiyue's eyes met with his, and she lightly nodded. Okay. Chu Luiyue and the others began to speed up and move toward the center of the god-slaying mound. Behind them, more and more stones rolled toward them. It would be fine if there were only a few. However, as time passed, the stones had almost gathered into a river and were rushing toward Chu Luiyue. This scene was too strange. However, what made Chu Luiyue feel strange was that she did not sense any killing intent from these stones. They seemed to be controlled by something and kept gathering toward her. However, specifically, it seemed that they did not intend to do anything. Of course, Chu Luiyue did not dare to let her guard down. She could only rely on her feelings to determine whether there was danger. After all, this was the god-slaying mound. Fortunately, Taizu had been here before and was experienced, so he could quickly find a safe way forward. Along the way, they were scared but not in danger. However, after walking for a long time, the surrounding scenery did not change at all. Taizu had said before that as long as they entered the tombstones of the supreme gods, these strange stones would definitely stop. But after such a long time, it still seemed so far away. Chu Luiyue could not help but ask, Taizu, when can we get out of here? Shengguan Jing glanced at the sky and said uncertainly, that's right. About 4 to 6 hours left. In fact, he was still understating it. Back then, he had walked here for 3 days and 3 nights. Even though it was his first time here and he didn't know where to go, it was enough to prove that this place was vast and he couldn't leave so quickly. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. She knew Taizu too well. This meant that they might stay here for a longer period of time. Now that they were moving at full speed, those behind them still couldn't catch up. There was always a certain distance between them. However, their strength was constantly being depleted, while the rocks were constantly converging. As their numbers increased, Chu Luiyue noticed that their aura and energy were much stronger than before. No one could guarantee that they would be able to walk out safely. Chu Luiyue felt a headache coming on. Could it be that there's something special on me that's causing this commotion? But it doesn't seem like anything. Wasn't everything fine in the past? Why is it so strange here? The key was that all cultivators could not fly here. This made their situation even more difficult. At this moment, a rock suddenly rolled to the bottom of Chu Luiyue's feet. Her heart skipped a beat. Her body fell to the side uncontrollably. Rong Xiao was standing beside her. When he saw this, he immediately hugged her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Chu Luiyue felt that she had fallen into a broad and firm chest. A cold fragrance instantly enveloped her. Just as she helped Rong Xiao stand up, she heard Taizu's exclamation behind her. Chu Luiyue knew that something was wrong. She immediately turned around and saw that Taizu seemed to have slipped on the rocks and was falling backward. Most importantly, when the great ancestor fell halfway, the void behind him suddenly rippled with a few waves. Half of Taizu's body was then swallowed by the void. Taizu. Before Chu Luiyue could finish her sentence, Taizu's figure had completely disappeared. Just like that, he disappeared before their eyes without making a sound. Chu Luiyue's eyes widened. She was about to go forward when Rong Xiao hugged her tightly. That's the void turbulence. Then, Chu Luiyue saw that the moment they rolled to the edge of the fluctuating void, they turned into dust. Her heart suddenly trembled. Senior Shengwan is a venerable god expert. He can definitely protect himself. Rong Xiao said in a low voice. She was still a venerable god, so she naturally could not go over. Chu Luiyue gritted her teeth. Rong Xiao was right. Taizu was powerful and had been here before. Nothing should happen to him. What she needed to do now was to protect herself. Gradually, the ripples calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Chu Luiyue had just opened her mouth when she suddenly felt a strong suction force beside her. She quickly turned her head and saw that the rocks had unknowingly formed some strange pattern on the ground. And that powerful force was erupting from the center of it. It was as if it was going to swallow her. The wind howled. Chu Luiyue's hair danced wildly. Rong Xiao hugged her tightly and pressed her head against his chest. Hold me tight. Chu Luiyue instinctively hugged his lean waist even more tightly. Rong Xiao looked up. Two extremely intense colors, one gold and one black, suddenly appeared in his eyes. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.